Chapter 1094. The main cannon of the Jade Dragon wasn't actually a cannon at all. The Magic Cloud-class internal defense ship platform was known as a space-based weapon platform. In fact, it was limited by the conditions of the past. It was only equipped with two types of weapons according to its two main functions. One was an electromagnetic railgun used to lock onto the troublesome mutants that cruised in the upper and middle layers of the atmosphere. It had astonishing single-target killing efficiency. Everyone was used to calling it the secondary cannon. The other type was a weapon of mass destruction that was specially designed to target the mutant nests in the wilderness and the extremely powerful mutants that were beyond imagination. It was the so-called main cannon. The main cannon charging, that the sergeant mentioned, was strictly speaking to charge the launcher. As the military strategic posture toward the wilderness changed from defense to counterattack, and gradually gained the initiative, new types of war weapons emerged one after another. The Magic Cloud-class platform had basically withdrawn from the front line. Now it was only engaged in scientific research, shooting birds, and helping to clear high-altitude routes. It basically no longer carried out ground attack missions. However, it was still in a state of preparation for war. The ammunition base was reduced by half, and there was still one round of ammunition for the main cannon. Claire wasn't worried about anything else. She was worried that the soldiers on the ship, whose sense of responsibility was at an all-time low, would make a careless mistake and throw out the deadly thing in the magazine. It wouldn't explode. Without authorization from the ground, this thing was just a lump of iron. However, if it really floated in the atmosphere, they would immediately become the joke of the aerospace army. At the same time, the aerospace army would also become the joke of the entire Earth. Although there was a high chance that many people wouldn't be able to laugh. In fact, there was already a precedent for this kind of situation where people couldn't laugh. Sir, during the dark side exercise, last year? You mean the Yoda incident? Major Chao Kai understood instantly, but he had no intention of changing his order. On the contrary, he undid the fastening buckle on his chair and floated up. During this time he casually pushed the crystal ball toward Claire, who instinctively reached out to grab it. So, I need my adjutant to focus. You stay here and watch for a while. I'll go clean up the internal affairs. Yes, sir. What else could Claire say? Moreover, looking at the translucent octopus that he suddenly obtained, he felt that this was really a pleasant surprise. Normally, he would only take a few glances at this little thing from afar. This was his first time seeing it up close. He spun the crystal ball and the little thing inside also spun as if it was enjoying it. How did it survive? Claire had no clue at all. After two more shakes, the water sealed inside had already formed a whirlpool. This time, the little octopus instinctively went around and stuck close to the inner wall. It just so happened that its head and one of its eyes were squeezed here. Through the light of the water, it twisted into a rather absurd expression and looked over. The two of them stared at each other. This little orange-red thing was an octopus larva. Its tentacles weren't obvious and it looked particularly adorable. However, the structure of its eyes was a little strange. Amidst the flickering watery light, it looked a little dazzling and blurry. If one looked at it for a long time, they would feel a little dizzy. Interesting. Claire was even more determined to ask Major Chao Kai for it. This time she wasn't just playing with it. She was going to ask for the exact same one. After all, Claire had an above-average sense of responsibility. She diverted her attention and quickly returned to business. After all, he was different from Major Chao Kai. He was a transient personnel, not a retired personnel. He had accumulated enough seniority as an adjutant, and there was still a bright future waiting for him. Claire was very attentive to the task Major Chao Kai had arranged. He unconsciously played with the crystal ball while opening the tactical sand table. The large projection space that was transparent from top to bottom showed the monitoring diagram of the entire ship. He focused on the system module related to the main cannon. After confirming that there were no abnormalities, he let out a sigh and continued to check the other modules. Speaking of which, Major Chao Kai's suggestion of heat engine testing was quite necessary. There hadn't been any combat missions in the past 2 years. With just the lightweight operation of the auxiliary cannon, some problems couldn't be discovered. For example, the research institute that was under their jurisdiction had actually secretly changed the backup information circuit. They should have stolen a part of the computing power of the platform. This was a F***king serious problem, alright? What was Myra, the chief mechanic, doing? If Claire was the chief officer, he would have immediately scolded Myra, but he wasn't, so he could only write it down first and report it to Chao Kai later. Also, hey, number 3. Claire directly reminded, That lock-on operation is redundant. The tactical sand table faithfully reflected the operating status of each system module. It also pushed some highly sensitive changes to the core work area. Claire glanced at the map of the target area displayed on the sand table and half-jokingly reminded, "If you really want to bomb Ban City, the location is also off. It's the North Mountain Lake area. The tactical nuclear bomb in the magazine only has a yield of 50,000 tons. It can't even cover the surface of the lake. Number 3? The person who answered Claire was the silent back of the number 3 non-commissioned officer. The silence lasted for at least 5 seconds, and from the second, Claire felt that something was wrong. In fact, during this time, other than the non-commissioned officer operating the main cannon in the opposite position, the one who had previously reported that the main cannon was energized, the other people had remained silent and didn't make any movements. It had been like this since he entered the command cabin. As for the one in number 3, even though he was scolded in the face, he didn't make the slightest sound. No. Claire reached for the electric beam gun at his waist. He didn't want to do anything. He still didn't understand what was going on. This action was just an instinctive reaction. But halfway through his hand he realized that he was still holding the crystal ball in his hand, so he was stunned. It was also at this moment that his palm inexplicably felt cold, as if something cold and sticky had penetrated the outer wall of the crystal ball and made contact with him. Claire was startled and instinctively swung her hand, but she had only swung it halfway when a strong numbness spread from her palm to her entire palm, then to her wrist, elbow joints, and then like an electric shock, it instantly spread to her whole body. Claire uttered a meaningless syllable and froze in his own seat. The fixed buckle locked his body, allowing him to maintain his previous sitting posture. There was no difference between him and the silent people in the seats. In the weightless environment, the crystal ball floated from his numb palm. The mini-octopus swam inside as if it was controlling everything. Claire really suspected that the paralyzing toxin that was raging in his body was the masterpiece of the mini-octopus. If that was the case, the door of the command cabin opened again and Major Chow Kai, who had gone to clean up previously, came back in. The Supreme Commander of the Jade Dragon turned a blind eye to the scene in front of him, as if this was the norm on the ship. He didn't go to retrieve the floating crystal ball either. Instead, he returned to the command seat and began a series of operations. Claire, whose neck was stiff, didn't even have the strength to turn his head. He couldn't see the situation above his side and could only hear the continuous short prompts. On the tactical sand table, the light and shadow changed. The previously prominent target became clearer and clearer, and round after round of operations were carried out around it. Crazy. Claire's already somewhat numb throat made a vague sound. At this time, even if he was a fool, he could guess what Chow Kai wanted to do. A surge of blood rushed up his throat, making him roar, "Sir, Chow Kai. Is your brain eaten by bugs?" Claire didn't know why Chow Kai did this, and why he did such a meaningless, stupid thing. "You're joking, right? Without authorization from the ground, even if you forcibly put a nuclear bomb on the launcher, it will only be a lump of iron. At most, it will explode in the thermosphere. Apart from a little bit of nuclear pollution, what else can you do?" Chow Kai didn't say anything and continued the corresponding operations. Claire looked at the various commands and authorization interfaces on the tactical sand table, and his eyelids twitched violently. He really couldn't understand it. Under normal circumstances, it would require 7 to 8 people to work together. How could Chow Kai, a single person, including the obviously problematic operator of the main cannon, be able to move it with just 2 people and at such a high speed? Moreover, at least 2 links that needed to be reported to the ground were inexplicably skipped. All the authorization locks and security doors were useless. There are also accomplices on the ground? Or is Chow Kai himself a super hacker who has hidden his strength? Thousands of thoughts and thousands of doubts finally turned into one sentence: why? After saying this, Claire's mind became clearer. The reason why he asked was that he really didn't understand, and he also wanted to delay and wait for changes. Chow Kai still didn't respond and only focused on operating. Claire could only try to find something to say, trying to fight against the numbness in his throat and mouth. "Let me guess, it's because you want to retire. Early retirement?" "Yes." Chow Kai unexpectedly spoke, and his answer was especially straightforward, just like the beeping sounds of his subordinates. "What kind of damned reason is that? Is that the reason you want to bomb Ban City and take revenge on society?" "First of all, I'm not bombing Ban City. Second, I'm not taking revenge on society." Chow Kai's voice didn't have the previous lazy and casual tone. My target is, as you can see, the Ban City trade zone on Beishan Lake. The target of my revenge is also there. Ha! Didn't I say that? I didn't say that because I'm a secret recipient of the mutation infection, there's a so-called infection threat, and then I'll be forced to retire? I really forgot to tell you. Mutation? Claire really didn't expect it to be this domain. Hehe, if it's the same for everyone then it's fine, but do you have it in Boo City? Oh, you're in Europe, then in East Asia, Spring City. That guy in Spring City has become a hero and star. Not to mention the New World. Why did I have to do this in Who City, a place like this? Directly report to the military? Claire really wanted to shout, this might just be a reason for someone to mess with you. But what's the point of discussing this? In contrast, Chao Kai's target was Ban City, which was even more unreasonable. Who City messed with you, so you're taking revenge on Who City? What does it have to do with Ban City? My wife and children are all there. This reason was so powerful that Claire was suddenly speechless. Of course, this is only one of the reasons. Chao Kai completely opened up a chatterbox and his words flowed without end. Discrimination against the mutated infected has never been an exception, and it's not targeted at me personally. The stupidest thing for the weak is to resign themselves to adversity and fight alone. People like me can only hug each other for warmth. So this time I'm doing this for myself, but also not for myself. I'm also doing this for those like me because of a so-called mutation infection, and they're labeled and thrown into the laboratory at any time to be squeezed out of their blood, sweat, and tears. What bullsh** T logic? Isn't that so? The trade zone in Ban City is indeed bullsh** T. How many vagrants and mutated infected people are squeezed in every year? Claire was so angry that she laughed. You idiot, even if this is the case with this cannon, the laboratory can be rebuilt, the researchers can be recruited, and the data can be backed up. The tens of thousands of vagrants and mutated infected people who are still alive over there will all be finished. Yes, that's right. I'm using this method to help them get rid of the impurity and pain of the mutation. Claire was stunned and finally realized the extremely absurd point. Even you are discriminating against yourself? I don't deny it. Chao Kai's tone was very calm. Some people are intoxicated by the ugly power and existence of the mutation, but we are not. Our church pursues the divine kingdom that is constructed together with the power of the soul. We want to use the torrent of holy light in the divine kingdom to cleanse the mutated superfluous and malignant tumors of matter. Whatever you think. The soul church? Claire's thoughts went one step deeper. The military had to screen and report the churches on the list of illegal religions, and constructing the divine kingdom of the soul together was the symbolic doctrine of the soul church. This was also one of the most active illegal churches recently. Chao Kai tacitly agreed. Hee. Claire only had the strength left to laugh bitterly. The military intelligence and the investigation department must be eating sh**t. You want such a lunatic who believes in a cult to be the commander of a ship? Also, this kind of technology that can bypass authorization and launch a city-destroying attack on its own? What the hell is going on? In this possibly meaningless conversation, at least 5 or more authorization gates were broken without any response. The corresponding feedback mechanism didn't seem to be working, and the ground didn't even respond. Of course, it could also be disconnected. On the bright side, maybe there would be countermeasures outside, but the inside of the ship didn't know. By the time they found out, they should have already been smashed into pieces by space-based weapons. As for the bad side, when Ban City turned into a sea of fire, the ground would wake up, and then this side would be smashed into pieces by space-based weapons. They were all pieces and there seemed to be no difference. As this thought flashed through his mind, Claire's body became more and more numb. He couldn't help but think that maybe he would directly die in the poisonous kiss of the octopus. He turned his gaze with difficulty. The thing that used to be cute, but now only felt terrifying, floated in the light and shadow of the tactical sand table. It happened to be near Ban City like a demon seal. Stuck on it, it marked death. Chapter 1095. When Claire was in a daze, the alarm sounded. At the same time, the brightness of the entire command cabin plummeted and flashed with a dazzling red light. A mature man's magnetic voice sounded, Class A violation discovered. All privileges of the ship's crew will be immediately taken away. All crew members on board will immediately stop all activities and stand by. I repeat, finally found it. Claire's fingertips twitched. This was no longer the tone of the shipboard's artificial intelligence. It was obvious that a high-level intelligence had intervened. However, he did not heave a sigh of relief. Because at this moment, with the deprivation of authority, all the machines in the command cabin which should have been locked down were still operating. On the tactical sand table, the real-time status of the main engine displayed did not change. The corner of his eyes twitched. This method mastered by the Soul Church is no longer called technology but damned magic. Is there a miracle to punish us? Claire did not wait for a miracle. 10 seconds later, the communication channel was replaced by a high-ranking general's request for negotiation. Although it was in a threatening tone, it was obvious that if there was another way, the other side would not use such an inefficient method at this critical moment. In fact, it was not inefficient, but there was no effect at all. The response from the other side was only Chao Kai's low murmur. His hands had stopped all operations. He just sat in the command seat and began to recite some inexplicable incantation or scripture. The firing process of the main cannon did not stop because of this. It had been completely dominated by that magic-like power and was advancing steadily. Claire had already seen the 30-second countdown. He really wanted to do something, but the numbness had already invaded the root of his tongue. He even lost the ability to speak. Even if his eyeballs were bulging out of their sockets, he could not do anything about what was happening in front of him. His emotions were essentially no different from the other side's nagging request for negotiation, and it would not have any effect. Under the effect of this weak struggle, the 30-second countdown quickly passed and returned to 0. A slight vibration was transmitted. Claire hoped that it was just an illusion under the high tension, but it was clearly the same feeling as when the main cannon was fired. It strictly matched with logic and reality. The main cannon was fired. The nuclear missile with a yield of 50,000 tons locked onto the inputted coordinates and ignited through the space-based launcher. Under the environment of light resistance, it could accelerate crazily in a very short time and rush into the atmosphere. Under the influence of Earth's gravity, its speed could eventually reach nearly Mach 20, which was already the level of an intercontinental ballistic missile. A distance of 400 kilometers could be reached in less than a minute. He didn't know what would happen to Sakura City, but the trade zone was definitely done for. I'm really done for. Claire's eyes were fixed and the octopus in the crystal ball was still floating in front of him. It was almost circling his face as if it was celebrating or mocking him. Of course, the octopus simply ignored him. Claire really wanted to swallow and crush the thing in one bite. He did open his mouth, but even though his face was ferocious, his mouth was only a slit. There was nothing else, only saliva that had accumulated in the gravity-free environment and stirred in his mouth. Other than highlighting his wretched state, there was no other meaning to it. But for some reason at this moment the octopus dancing in the air suddenly trembled. It actually turned around and turned its head. The once adorable, gloomy and cold eyes once again appeared in front of Claire. But this time the place seemed to be a little deformed, twisting into a very funny arc shape. In fact, the round body of the octopus was also twisting, as if an invisible hand had penetrated the crystal ball and directly grabbed it, twisting it into all kinds of strange shapes. After half a second, even the crystal ball outside had been twisted. Only then did Claire know that the crystal ball was actually not a crystal ball, but a different texture. He was a little confused. At this time, the chanting in the command cabin was also distorted and deformed, as if it was being strangled by the throat. Claire opened his eyelids with difficulty, but he heard a muffled bang next to his ear. It sounded like it came from the position of the main cannon operating officer opposite him. He could no longer turn his head to look, and it was followed by almost the same sound. This time it originated from the command seat above him. Almost at the same time, Claire's face was splashed with a warm mark. In fact, there were fragments of similar temperature and texture spreading out within his field of vision. It was like a bewitching flower of flesh had bloomed. It was close to 7 o'clock in the evening in Ban City. The sky had just darkened, and it was the peak of the evening. The temporary magnetic track passage above Beishan Lake opened. Even the trade district at the northern end of the lake could faintly see the blurry belt of light in the distant sky. It was currently covered by dark clouds, meandering and flowing. Inlu had just come down from the upper deck. She had been in a long-distance conference with Meng Chong on the Jadeite Light, as well as Jiang Yuanzhen and the others in D-City. They were discussing how to adjust the blood flame order after Luonan's high-key and powerful style of doing things. They talked about how the high-level conference, which had been brewing for many days, was about to begin. More new information needed to be formed, so they temporarily paused. They were prepared to make further plans after the conference. She clearly knew the truth, but Yinlu still wasn't quite used to Luo Nan's phenomenal performance of showing off his invincible might tens of thousands of kilometers away while sleeping on the yacht. She subconsciously headed toward the cabin Luo Nan was in. Yinlu habitually glanced at a corner after entering the main hall of the lower deck. Not surprisingly, she saw Snake Tongue hugging her knees. She was leaning there, her entire face buried in her knees. Snake Tongue didn't react to Yinlu's arrival at all. Ever since Snake Tongue became Luo Nan's experimental subject, her condition had never been good. Especially in the past 2 days, it seemed that she had been struck by some sort of ocular technique. Her condition had worsened. She was fine before Luo Nan's eyes, but most of the time she had this dispirited and listless appearance. Yinlu gave up on communicating with Snake Tongue. She just came here out of habit. She didn't have a goal in mind. Luo Nan was resting in the bedroom, and he was splitting his attention to stir up trouble several thousand kilometers away. She didn't dare to disturb him. This was strange. Just as she thought that she couldn't be disturbed, her wristband vibrated. The sound wasn't loud, but it was exceptionally clear in the quiet room. Yinlu frowned and looked. The name of the caller entered her eyes, causing her eyebrows to jump. A text message from the same source was sent over at this time. Yinlu didn't look at it in detail. She directly connected. President He Yu. This was how Yinlu addressed He Yuan. The two originally didn't have much interaction, but Yinlu had been collecting information from all walks of life on Luo Nan's orders recently. It was absolutely difficult to accomplish this by relying solely on the channels of the Blood Flame Order. It was unavoidably troublesome in order to guarantee the results. Though He Yuan was in a closed-door state, she still gave Yinlu a lot of support. Over time, the two became familiar with each other. Yinlu's impression of He Yuan was that she was the type of person who did business according to the rules. She was also someone who understood propriety. She was never lacking in courtesy. But this time, the other side directly interrupted her speech. Mr. Luo is by your side? He's in the inner room. You guys move immediately. The nuclear strike is expected to arrive in 85 seconds. Immediately avoid danger. I've sent the location of the Civil Air Defense Project closest to you. If you don't make it in time, enter the water nearby. At least a depth of 50 meters. Immediately. Yinlu didn't doubt the authenticity of the information. Clearly this was no joke. Moreover, as she and He Yuan were exchanging information, an alarm sounded in the air above the trade zone. It didn't matter if it was an air defense alarm or a nuclear strike alarm. In short, the elongated sharp wail truly bombarded her heart. Snake Tongue, who was in the corner, also raised her head to look. Yinlu's mind didn't have too much information at this moment. She was completely driven by instinct. She threw herself forward and opened the wooden sliding door. At the same time she called out, "Mr.?" Yinlu didn't finish her words because Luo Nan had already sat up in the inner room, hugging his quilt. It was unknown how long he had been up, but his hair was still a bit messy. Right now, his gaze was passing through the cabin's viewing window, casting into the noisy darkness outside. Yinlu's mind relaxed at first, but she soon became nervous again. "Mister, we must immediately..." Too late. We're a step late? There are always these unexpected things. Luo Nan reached out his hand to rub his already somewhat messy hair. He looked a bit distressed. His mouth said it was too late, but his figure didn't budge. He still hugged his quilt and sat down. His sigh was neither too fast nor too slow. Snake Tongue also moved in and stood by Yinlu's side. The two glanced at each other. Although the emotions in their hearts weren't the same, they stopped talking at the same time. Yes, no matter how nervous they were when they saw Luo Nan's appearance, they subconsciously, in principle, had to comply. Even if a nuclear bomb were to fall from the sky in the next moment and smash in front of their eyes, they still had to maintain this dignity. Only in this way could they demonstrate their respect and reverence for Luo Nan. Yinlu and Snake Tongue didn't speak, but He Yuan's communications never ended. They were separated by several thousand kilometers, but she still transmitted a rare sense of nervousness and urgency over, "Your positions haven't changed? Sister Yuan, I know this matter. I'll take care of it." The air went silent for a moment before He Yuan responded. "Okay." The lingering sound reverberated within the yacht at Northern Mountain Lake. And in some secret military base several thousand kilometers away, He Yuan wore a loose robe. She stood barefoot on the ice-cold floor. Nutrient fluids slid down from her body and head. She cut a rare sorry figure. She had indeed forcefully interrupted the debugging experiment to warn Luo Nan. But Luo Nan's reaction made it hard for her to not be startled. On one side, A live broadcast was displayed in the projection area. Multiple angles of outer space and the atmosphere were stitched together to form a mosaic. There was a certain delay in the signal due to the several thousand kilometers distance and the mosaic of the image. So what she was seeing right now was the situation of 1 second, 2 seconds, or even 5 or 6 seconds ago. At this time, the various images had yet to completely lock onto the position of the falling nuclear warhead. She would only occasionally catch a glimpse of the dot of light. The dot of light shuttled back and forth within the complex misty environment. Dr. Pan, who had previously presided over the experiment, sighed with emotion. It's been a few years since I've seen this scene. Ban City and the surrounding areas should have missile interception systems, right? Of course they've mainly been used to shoot birds in recent years. When I was young. He Yuan turned to look at him. What's wrong? The front-end satellite early warning system is abnormal. We've already missed the interception window. Is this a coincidence? It was too late to say anything now. The image showed that Ban City's on-duty fighter had taken off, and the missile defense system had been turned on. But this was just the best they could do. Ban City was already in chaos. The nuclear strike alarm was playing faithfully. Sound waves and text messages bombarded the city, paralyzing the evening rush hour in an instant. The true challenge is after the warhead hits the ground. Tianbang walked in with large strides, dressed in a military uniform. His voice was clear and bright. I really didn't expect that there would still be a leading figure in this world right now. Do you need help, ma'am? He Yuan didn't respond, even though Tianbang's words represented her stance in a certain sense. 85 seconds was very short, but it was also very long. She had already done quite a few things, but they all seemed to be meaningless. But in the end, she remembered Luonan's calm response. The mid-course interception failed. Actually, there was no mid-course interception at all. Tianbang sighed as he watched. Space-based weapons were like this. Low resistance, high speed, short range. After breaking through the atmosphere, their speed exceeded Mach 20, bringing enormous pressure to the terminal anti-missile system. The reaction time was too limited. There's still 20 seconds. The time of destruction was already madly jumping toward the end in the time it took to speak. The first wave shouldn't be a problem. Tianbang unconsciously sped up his speech to express his opinion. They had given nearly a minute and a half of warning time. The surrounding environment was still fine. An extraordinary should be able to survive no matter what. But what happened after this decisive method wasn't as simple as a post-disaster rescue. Yuan finally responded. She spoke of matters unrelated to the scene. The Amaterasu court has taken to the sky. It's heading toward Beishan Lake. Interception. My ass. Were they really not going to do anything? Tianbang's mouth really couldn't keep up at this time. On the contrary, the military personnel in charge of monitoring and interception used highly reduced professional terms to form a storm that assaulted the eardrums through the live broadcast signal. Compared to the quick and calm terms used by the long-range personnel, the information link near Ban City was perhaps more representative. Someone, possibly a pilot, had already begun to yell. At this time, the high-speed camera captured a few effective frames. The high heat reaction of the nuclear warhead was displayed as a dot of light falling from the sky in the dim image of the thermal imaging. And behind it was the despairing chain trajectory of an electromagnetic cannon that brushed past. The countdown had already entered 10 seconds. Perhaps it was 5. All means of interception had failed. The fate of the safe trade zone of Ban City had been decided. Even Tianbang felt the blood in his entire body accelerate. His pores opened up and his scalp went slightly numb. He subconsciously opened his eyes wide and his pupils dilated, preparing to receive the terrifying cloud that was about to explode. He Yuan's body suddenly trembled. This was the information that Tianbang had received from the corner of his eye. But his brain didn't have the time to analyze it further, because at this time, the real scene image that had been pieced together split. It was hard to describe such a change. As a matter of fact, it was just a shadow that suddenly appeared on the real scene. It was so straight that it looked like someone had drawn it with a ruler. It was right in front of the bullet's light spot, and it had directly cut open the void that it was reflecting. Yes, this was the feeling. In the next instant, the dot of light of the warhead entered the shadow, and then, there was no then. The target has disappeared? Someone said in the communication channel, and then there was meaningless noise. But Tianbang saw that the real scene image was clearly fluctuating. It was as if the void was covered in clouds, trying to erase the traces left behind by the shadow. But the shadow was there, stretching across the horizon. There was a sense of disorderly three-dimensional disorder. It was as if one side of the void was curled up and the other side was curled up. It had lost its previous flat appearance, and instead formed a strange scene like a confrontation between two high cliffs. It was more like a festering wound that was difficult to heal in a short period of time. It was exposed in front of everyone's eyes. Chapter 1096. Right now, the professional technicians of the military who were dubbing the real scene images were at a loss for words. Their professional vocabulary was simply incapable of accurately and appropriately describing a phenomenon that exceeded the predetermined rules. Actually, it wasn't just them. Even Tianbang was a bit stupefied for a time after his initial impression of the scene. He was faced with the results of the images and scans from the sky, from the ground, from the far end, and from the near end. In the end, he simply ridiculed, "Is this a dimensional slash? Let's call it a rift for the time being." The previous feeling of a deep gorge facing off against a high gorge wasn't wrong. It was like the smooth night sky had been sliced and torn apart by a tyrannical force to form a deep and serene rift. It was still extending, and it was unknown where its bottom led to. Tianbang's line of sight fell into the hole of the rift. He was unable to pull it out for a while. What's inside? Where does it lead to? If I jump in, will I arrive at a new plane? He Yuan didn't respond. Her focus was clearly different. She used ground monitoring, low-altitude satellites, and other methods to confirm that Luonan was unharmed. Then she adjusted her view to a far-off wide-angle mode. It was as if she wanted to find out just how far the rift extended to in the end. Yes, the void rift had a direction. After it swallowed the nuclear warhead, it clearly extended from the west to the east. Its farthest end already far exceeded the current recording range of the real scene images. Even if she changed her view, she wouldn't be able to reach it in a short amount of time. Many people didn't care about where it would extend to. They didn't even understand the situation before their eyes. What was the point of expanding it in a hurry? Clearly He Yuan wasn't that bored. Soon Tianbang understood. She wanted to establish a link between two important links. The rift above Northern Mountain Lake and the aircraft heading towards Northern Mountain Lake. It also seemed to be able to connect. It wasn't He Yuan's conceptual connection. Instead, it was the rift that continued to extend outwards. If he followed the approximate length of the rift, he might be able to touch it. The reason why Tianbang wasn't sure was because the straight crack that left a deep impression like a ruler had become more and more unstable as it extended. It had long lost its sense of direction. It was like the cracks that extended like branches and vines when a shoddy wall was about to collapse. It was also like a bolt of lightning that exploded in the night sky. No one knew which direction it would bend in the next moment, and it could even disappear at any time. However, there were always bigger wounds that appeared in the tiny cracks at the ends, and they continued to push forward. Well, lightning was more accurate. The description was complicated, but in reality, the speed at which the void cracks were advancing was extremely fast. It wasn't any slower than the speed of a nuclear warhead. At the edges of the cracks, there were some that were moving, some that were expanding, and some that had already healed, revealing different forms. However, the front end that extended outwards had already exceeded the recording range of the high-speed cameras. Even if He Yuan had already intentionally chosen to view from afar, she could only barely keep up. There was no need to even mention the details. "I feel like it's going to collapse," Tianbang murmured. Dr. Pan did not understand. "Don't you feel like this? Feels like the vault of heaven might collapse at any time." Sure enough, shoddy walls are more appropriate? This time, Dr. Pan understood half of what Luonan said, but it wasn't good for him to delve deeper. This was because the front end of the void crack that seemed like it could disappear at any time, but it was still advancing at a terrifying speed. It had already entered the same lens as the Amaterasu quartz flying device, which was moving at a similar speed. "They're going to collide." Tianbang whistled. Rather than saying this was a judgment, it was better to say that he was looking forward to a play. From the direction that the void crack was extending in, it could be seen that Mr. Luonan, the one who drew the crack, had a comprehensive understanding of the entire situation. At the very least, he seemed to have a clear understanding of who it was that had tossed a nuclear warhead down above his head. Then were the two sides going to fight now? A fight between extraordinary levels? No. Tianbang suddenly found it hard to laugh when he thought deeper into the matter. The two sides came at each other at high speeds. They didn't give the spectators too much time to evaluate and guess. The distance between them rapidly shrunk as they drew closer to each other. Then, they brushed past each other. Tianbang subconsciously narrowed his eyes the instant they brushed past each other. But nothing happened between the two, if not for the violent undulation of the flying device at the edge of the void crack. Tian Bang keenly sensed that the undulation of the flying device didn't seem to be caused by turbulence in the air. Instead, it was more like a picture on a warped sticker. Even the void that bore it was warping and fluctuating. Wow! He let out an emotional exclamation. The problem was that this kind of turbulence wasn't the main show. This was because the void crack continued to extend at an astonishing speed. If this continued, then the area it extended to, the Amaterasu Court? The Amaterasu Court was located in the open sea east of Ban City. The position where the sun rose represented the Amaterasu Order's transcendent and powerful control over the city of 10,000 gods. Honestly speaking, it wasn't that far away. At the very least, it was nothing compared to the speed at which the void crack was extending. Tian Bang, who was at the side, did not have much room to ponder. In just a few breaths' time, in the east, half of the sky that was already filled with greenish-black colors suddenly shone brightly. It was as if a sun had leaped out more than 10 hours in advance. Or was it a nuclear bomb that had crashed there? Tian Bang really thought so. But after a long time he didn't see a mushroom cloud rise, nor did he hear any explosion. He couldn't help but feel a little confused. Was it a nuclear explosion? Tian Bang asked He Yuan. The latter also shook her head. Although it was convenient, it would still miss a considerable amount of information. It was difficult to make a quick judgment. As they spoke, the strong light in the east dimmed. In this barely visible light, the spreading of the void crack finally seemed to be hindered. It was as if there was some kind of power in the strong light that was resisting it. Or more accurately, it was an invisible barrier that no one had discovered before. It was blocking in front of the void crack and was slowly appearing under the collision. In a sense, the void crack was spreading. But it was no longer like before, where it seemed to be tearing the sky apart. Instead, it began to spread. It was as if an invisible porcelain had been smashed in the void, and a spiderweb-like crack appeared. And in the inner layer of the crack, which was the depths of the strong light, there seemed to be vaguely a tree trunk, branches and leaves, as well as the corresponding veins extending outwards. This wasn't just a description, it was an actual image. There really was a giant tree that towered into the sky. Its canopy was like the clouds, but it was also colorful. It filled more than half of the lens, and it was far from being able to capture it. It felt as if its branches and leaves had even spread to the coastline of Ban City, and were moving towards a deeper area. But now, a small half of this scene had already been torn apart by the void crack. One could vaguely see thick branches and gorgeous colorful leaves breaking off and flying down. They came from nothingness and returned to nothingness. No matter who it was, no matter how close or far, when they saw this scene, they were all momentarily speechless. And this scene didn't last for too long. As the strong light continued to weaken, the giant tree that towered into the sky also dimmed. Even the void crack that had caused everything to explode seemed to have been filled with too much light. Finally, its momentum dissipated, and it gradually closed up without a trace. Another few seconds passed. Everyone's line of sight was once again covered by the curtain of night that should have been present during nightfall. The sea and sky to the east of Ban City were once again vast and boundless. And in every corner of the city, shrill sirens, noisy shouts, car horns, and other sounds became embellishments of the current situation. Oh my, why did you have to make such a mess? Emola, who was in the aircraft, had just experienced a turbulence that wasn't caused by air turbulence. With her highly sensitive senses, she could even hear the many circuits of the aircraft, and the groans of the outer shell cracking and shaking. The various furnishings in the luxurious cabin that she was in were also a mess. Most importantly, she was already all alone. The two people who were originally riding with her were forced to return to take charge of the defense of the god court the moment the void crack appeared. They didn't even greet them. This was really rude. That's right. An unexpected result. Emola laughed in self-mockery. She raised her wine cup. The cup contained a bit of wine that she had saved from a spilled wine bottle. She didn't mind. She let the translucent wine swirl around the rim of the cup and between her lips and teeth, just like the undulating void. Compared to this, the wine was really dull and tasteless. She's younger than me by 10 years. Is it because of her talent, or is there some other reason? In any case, it looks delicious. Her teeth streaked across the wine, and she rubbed her lips that were painted light purple. Blood slowly came out. She didn't feel any pain. Instead, her smile became all the more bewitching. But in the next second, she confirmed the direction of the aircraft. She rolled her eyes, got up, and walked into the cockpit with large strides. Are you trying to bring me to my death? Is troublesome the wrong angle? How can I go to the Amaterasu God Court, Xia City? Thank you. Speaking of which, do you have enough fuel? Registration for the intercity aircraft? Visiting relatives. My blood sister is there. Yeah, there's a cheap master there too. The aircraft brushed shoulders with the low-flying fighter jet. Going to Xia City required flying over the skies of Ban City. There were still some rational pilots who took a detour around Beishan Lake. The problem was that in the eyes of some people, this so-called detour was meaningless. Emola could clearly feel that when the aircraft passed through the thick clouds above Ban City, the cracks in the void and the powerful light couldn't completely tear through them. Her body and soul structure clearly had a sort of marvelous penetrative feeling. Emola maintained her smile, and this feeling quickly disappeared without a trace. She didn't say anything else. Of course, it was also possible that he had entered a level that she still couldn't reach. She didn't bother about this. She just drained the remaining wine in her cup in one gulp. Very gentlemanly. Delicious boy. He Yuan and Tianbang were thousands of kilometers away, especially on the level of extraordinaries. It was really hard for them to grasp the details of the situation over at Ban City. But no matter what was said, the most difficult and complicated period should have passed as the aircraft passed through the skies above Ban City and headed in the direction of the old continent. There was no follow-up from the direction of the Amaterasu God Court or the direction of Beishan Lake. Both sides entered a seemingly tacit state of silence. It was frail, but it gave one a narcotic sense of security. He Yuan's eyebrows relaxed a bit, but she cut a bit of a sorry figure at the moment. She said, "I'll go take care of it." Tianbang said without thinking, "I don't mind." He Yuan didn't respond at all. She just left. Tianbang shrugged his shoulders, his gaze sweeping over the live image. There was no longer any meaning in the situation over at Ban City. The few people who stood at the very top of the world were taking revenge on one side while stealing from the main camp. Their thoughts were clear and the results were vague yet barely acceptable. They wouldn't be able to find the trigger to erupt in a short amount of time. Probably. After all, even if the changes on the level of extraordinaries were laid out before their eyes, they wouldn't be able to understand them. In comparison, he was a bit more interested in tracing back to the source. The problem was that his position in the army system was relatively high. He didn't have much of a card to play on the side of the independent Air Force. He had only heard a bit about what had happened on the magic cloud platform above his head. He didn't know the specifics at all. He just faced Yuan's back and shouted, "Jade Dragon. If there's any definite news, send it over. Everyone can help together." Yuan still didn't pay attention to him. But at this time, Luo Nan's voice rang out from the other side of the communication. "Sister Yuan, help me out." Yuan's feet stopped. "Please speak, Mr. Luo. It's the one in near-Earth orbit. You guys were talking about something called the Jade Dragon just now. I'm quite interested in that side. There might be something left behind. I want to take it and study it." Yuan had already responded without waiting for Luo Nan to finish speaking. "I'll think of a way. Mr. Luo, are you doing well on your side?" It's nothing. Sometimes I just feel that those two from the Amaterasu Order are a bit too tactful. That's why I say broadening your horizons and being more knowledgeable are still beneficial, right?" Tianbang clenched his fists behind Yuan's back, but in the end he could only roll his eyes and prick his ears to listen to the conversation between the two. Speaking of which, he could understand what it meant to be tactful, but how could he understand broadening his horizons and being more knowledgeable? He turned his head to look at the space that was already beginning to close up. He seemed to be lost in thought. In Tianbang's position, he had to consider a bit more. But for a frontline soldier, all he needed to do was carry out orders. Before the situation in Ban City was completely clear, the Jade Dragon had already left the inner defensive perimeter in Earth's near-Earth orbit. Its privileges had already been completely sealed, and it practically sunk into darkness. Only the solar panels were still reflecting a bit of the faint light from the distant edge of the Earth. Soon, a landing ship docked with the platform. Dozens of aerospace army officers, who could be summoned in a short amount of time, forcefully boarded the ship. Contrary to expectations, they advanced like a hot knife through butter. Everyone on the Jade Dragon appeared to be in a stupefied state. Whether they were soldiers or researchers, they were all extremely cooperative. There was no challenge at all. The commandos charged all the way to the command cabin. They broke the door open and entered. All they saw was the tactical sand table projection that was still flickering under the support of an unknown source of energy. Under the dim light, large amounts of solid, liquid, and other mixed fragments of human tissue floated and scattered. There were 8 personnel led by Claire, the adjutant of the Jade Dragon. They were restrained by buckles in their respective positions. Some were unconscious like Claire. Some had already died without a sound. The preliminary judgment was that they had ingested an excessive amount of anesthetic. The commando leader discussed with the sergeant in charge of technical identification and decided to first report to their superiors. At the same time, they began to take photos and videos of the messy command cabin. They also searched for the corresponding surveillance footage to preserve first-hand information. After receiving new orders, they began to further deal with the aftermath. While his subordinates were busy, the commando leader suppressed his disgust and entered the core of the command cabin. It was currently also the area with the densest concentration of all kinds of flesh and floating debris. It didn't take long for him to find the object specified in the new order. It was a crystal ball that looked a bit distorted. Because it was distorted, it gave off a very strange and cheap feeling. Inside it was a lump of rotten flesh that was almost unrecognizable. This lump of rotten flesh was still twitching, as if it was maintaining a rather tenacious vitality. The commando leader even saw that there was an area under the mangled flesh and nerves. It looked like an eyeball that was basically intact, projecting a cold and demonic line of sight. The commando leader actually felt a little dizzy when he looked into the eye. He subconsciously took a step back. His movements were too large and attracted the attention of his subordinates. Many people raised their guns, including the commando leader himself. But at this moment, he saw that the demonic eye seemed to have been slashed by an invisible blade. Blood splattered, but it was blocked by the inner wall of the distorted crystal ball, so the sputtering effect was limited. But it was obvious that this was a heavy blow. Not to mention the eye that had almost been cut in half, even the twitching flesh and nerves around it had weakened. The question was, where did this blow come from? What was going on? The commando leader didn't dare to move for a moment. With his rich combat experience, he subconsciously felt that there was still some kind of tension in the command cabin that had been splattered with flesh and blood. There was an invisible force that was highly dangerous to armed personnel like them. He turned on the communicator and contacted the command center again because this was clearly different from the description in the order. A few seconds later, he received a more accurate answer. "That's right. All right, whatever you say." The commando leader put in a lot of thought for this temporary order. It wasn't easy for him to find a sealed metal container and store the distorted crystal ball. Strangely enough, the entire process didn't have any twists and turns. After storing it inside, he could sense a rhythmic pulse in the container through the sensor on the exoskeleton armor. There was even a kind of ice-cold touch that made him shiver involuntarily. Illusion. The commando leader didn't delay any further. He personally escorted the crystal ball and the metal container that contained the rotten flesh out of the Jade Dragon. He then quickly switched to another transport ship. After traveling in orbit for a period of time, the ship went against the direction of Earth's rotation and entered the atmosphere. This kind of transportation method was similar to a rail elevator. In theory, it could deliver the express mail to a designated person in any corner of the world within an hour. 20 minutes later, the transport ship penetrated the thick clouds and arrived at a certain sea in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It was obvious that the weather conditions in this sea were terrible. Not only were the clouds thick, but there were also dense lightning flashing deep in the clouds. And in this vast sea where the storm raged, there was a luxurious cruise ship bobbing up and down in the wind and waves. Strangely enough, there was a thick fog surrounding it. If it weren't for the clear coordinates and the powerful lighting equipment on the cruise ship, the commando leader would have had to spend a lot of effort to discover this small metal box. How did I end up here? Chapter 1097. Reality did not give him a clear answer. Since there was no platform on the luxurious cruise ship that could take off and land an interstellar transport ship, the assault team leader had to exit the cabin and use the short-range flight function of the exoskeleton armor to land directly on the cruise ship, cross the last kilometer, and deliver the goods to his doorstep. Without a doubt, someone who could use military resources like this and use such resources had to be someone with great power. If it was just to satisfy some people's curiosity, it would be fine, and it could even be called fooling around. But when it came to the mastermind behind this matter, or even to destroy physical evidence, it should not be. As a qualified professional soldier, the assault team leader should not be so crazy in his mind, but in the current situation he could not help but think too much. When he opened the hatch, he subconsciously checked the black box inside the armor. Only then did he jump and use the short-range jet engine on the exoskeleton armor to pierce through the layers of clouds and quickly approach the luxurious yacht. Almost the moment he exited the cabin and flew down, the high-precision radar had already reported many reaction signals that could pose a threat to him. The assault team leader almost crashed back into the transport ship. It was also at this time that his superior gave him a timely comfort and warning. You don't have to worry about anything. Deliver the goods safely to the designated person, and you will be given credit. This is more like an illegal operation. The assault team leader cursed in his heart, but he still braced himself and moved toward the luxurious yacht under the blinking warning lights. When he was only about 200 meters away from the yacht, a voice finally sounded from the previously designated temporary communication channel. Please come to this position. The assault team leader pursed his lips and swore to be a mute tool. He listened to the arrangements on the other side, drew a small arc around the hull, and arrived above the precise coordinates given by the other party. His vision passed through the thick fog. He felt that this should be a pool deck, a place where the rich played and indulged themselves. However, the visibility here was terrible. It was as if the pool that originally stored water had become a place where clouds and fog had accumulated. Since it was already nighttime, ordinary people could really get lost here. Through the multidimensional imaging equipment, he could confirm that there were 4 people on the deck, 2 men and 2 women. This number made him feel a little more at ease. The suspicion of a private transaction was lessened a little. Temporarily dispelling the distracting thoughts in his mind, the assault captain adjusted the exoskeleton armor to hover mode and descended. Even so, the tail flames still inevitably scorched a part of the wooden deck. Of course, there was no one here to stop him and ask for compensation. There was only a thin and capable man who directly walked forward without the slightest fear of the 3-meter-tall steel war equipment, indicating that the handover was complete. The multidimensional imaging showed that the other 3 people were still in their original positions, hidden in the thick clouds. If that was all there was to it, there was indeed a strong sense of mystery. But a woman's lively voice suddenly shattered the atmosphere. That's it? No wonder you're secretary he. What a great honor. Aha, little Zhang, you are making things too complicated. This has nothing to do with face. If you're hit in the head by a nuclear bomb from the military and you're not hurt at all you have to do is make a phone call and say, do me a favor and we'll call it even. Do you believe that the people in the military will immediately clean themselves up and let you do whatever you want to them? Disgusting. Amidst the confusing and informative conversation, the assault captain handed over the sealed metal box. The thin man in charge of receiving it nodded at him. You can go now. With that, he turned around but did not face anyone on the deck. Instead, he walked quickly to where the swimming pool was. The assault captain had a stomach full of questions, but at this moment, his superior kept urging him. Hurry up and go. Don't delay. He had no choice but to obey. He adjusted the hover mode and increased the power of the jet engine, causing the charred part of the deck below to really burn. Because of the high heat that was emitted, a part of the clouds was blown away, causing the thick fog above the swimming pool to disperse a little, revealing a vague figure above. It was not one of the 4 people that had been detected earlier. That person was also hovering in the air at the same height as him. However, he was not wrapped in the exoskeleton armor, nor did he have any engine to support him. He just quietly hovered like a cold ghost. The assault captain shuddered. When he wanted to take a closer look, the exoskeleton armor had already sped up, and soon he was more than 100 meters in the air. When he looked down again, the fog had covered the deck again and he could not see anything. As for multidimensional imaging, enhanced scanning and so on, please, he was not an idiot. The assault captain was not stupid. He strictly followed the instructions and directly deleted the temporary channel, putting an end to this matter. However, it was difficult to control a person's heart. He could not hide his curiosity, and while the distance between them increased, he subconsciously lowered his head to take another look. Speaking of which, it was strange. He was already hundreds of meters in the air, but the farther he got, the clearer the deck became. He could vaguely see the 5 figures, especially the one floating above the swimming pool. Was that person? He seemed to have already obtained the metal box with the strange crystal ball and rotten meat sealed inside. Then he raised his head and looked over. Looked over? The assault captain's heart skipped a beat. It was also at this moment that a powerful binding force suddenly acted on his body. The pressure on his body and the sharp alarm in the cabin formed a chemical reaction, stimulating the secretion of a large amount of adrenaline, and his entire body suddenly tensed up. Silencing the witness. He cried out in his mind. He practically increased the output power of the engine by instinct, but the power also rose along with it. It was to the extent that the value on the altimeter didn't increase. Instead, it flew down. As for the assault captain, he felt as if he had gone from a gravity-free environment to 10 GS in an instant. It was to the extent that his vision went black and his consciousness went blank for a second or two, maybe even longer. Bang! By the time he came back to his senses, the exoskeleton armor had already returned to the deck. Its landing posture was actually quite appropriate. Aside from the empty deck, there was also the pilot who was spinning around. At this time, another message came from his superior. Danilo, there's been a change of orders. You stay there and assist in completing the new mission. You also need to eliminate the possible infection. I wish you good luck. What? What the hell are you doing? Zhang Yingying shouted towards the sky above the swimming pool. She had heard the news of the nuclear bomb descending on Osaka City. She was unable to contact the real person, so she ran over to look for her avatar. She never expected to see such a scene. She was the one with the least amount of information in this group. She was more and more unable to understand what was going on. Get back the evidence. Luonen said some nonsense. Isn't that place closer to Osaka City? The conditions here are better. It's more suitable for collecting and organizing materials. As Luonan spoke, the more agile control lines of the magnetite mica had already pierced through the twisted crystal ball and rotten flesh countless times. It used its unique perspective to observe. Zhang Yingying was completely unaware of this. She just asked, "What the hell is this? A mutant?" It should be, and it's highly contagious. At the very least, the one who sent it over has already been infected. Luonan's hands were filled with dense water vapor. He had already created layers of isolation. So stay away. Hey, what about Meng Chong? There's no problem at the moment. The possibility of ability users suffering from mutant infection has always been very small. However, the space-based platform needs to be screened. I just talked to Sister Yuan. While speaking, Luonan simply sent the source of infection into the spatial fault to eliminate hidden dangers. At this time, Black Lion, who had been drooling to join in on the fun, called out from the side of the swimming pool, "Brother Luonan, that meeting has started?" They were indeed late due to this incident in the middle of the meeting. Perhaps they had already missed one or two items on the agenda. Since we're late, it doesn't matter if we delay a bit longer. There's nothing interesting ahead anyway. Luonan had a completely indifferent attitude. He waited for Meng Chong to bring the highly suspected infected courier out of the cabin. Meng Chong began to explain and settle them down, and then Luonan's figure disappeared into the mist once more. Well, this guy really wasn't willing to cooperate. That's right. Anyone who just had a nuclear warhead smashed into their head, whether it exploded or not, would not let a formalistic meeting take up their time. Black Lion shrugged. He didn't care. The reason why he spoke was because he was entrusted by someone to pass the message. But what could he do if Luonan didn't cooperate? Luonan had the qualifications to be willful. Frankly speaking, Black Lion still hadn't completely digested the events that happened over at Ban City. He didn't have the mood to participate in the meeting and watch Abner play all kinds of political maneuvers. Even if the meeting was held for 10 days and 10 nights, could he analyze how Luonan did it? Could he finally figure out how this underage child grasped the secrets of inconceivable power in such a short amount of time? He couldn't. If he couldn't, then what the hell was he doing? The human heart always had its ups and downs. For a time, Black Lion's interest was dull. He waved goodbye to Luonan and prepared to find a secluded place to sort out his thoughts and emotions. He didn't walk far before someone called him again. Black Lion looked at the contact and his lips curled. It was Old L's call. This old thing, who had been eliminated in a dishonorable manner, took the initiative to get involved again after a few hours of psychological and physiological adjustment. Black Lion didn't know if this old thing had a deeper plan or if he was simply intrigued by the major incident that nearly became the headline news of the entire 90s. Perhaps it was the latter? Black Lion could easily tell that Old Els was actually using a simulated human voice. Clearly, he had yet to completely recover from the important property loss of a few hours ago. Perhaps he was lying in the health pod right now, consuming some of the extremely limited energy in that old and broken body. You're next to that kid? I just left. Have you figured out the twists and turns? Heh, are you teaching me how to do things? It's just a conventional prejudgment. If you didn't do it, then it probably proves that the kid has caused an extremely direct impact on you, to the point where your curiosity to get to the bottom of things has been suppressed. Congratulations on still having the strength to say such a long sentence. Sure enough, once you've been eliminated, all sorts of calmness and reason will return. From this point of view, perhaps that luxurious health pod is the best place for you to return to. The Black Lion sent a warning and a curse before ending the communication. This wasn't considered an act of anger because he really didn't have anything to say or communicate with. He had been by Luonan's side when the incident occurred, or at least he had been by one of Luonan's sides. He had high-level privileges as an extraordinary, helping him understand the general outline of the entire incident as well as some key links. However, the truly crucial point was still like the thick clouds and mist surrounding the Jade Lightship. The phenomenon was there, but its roots were unfathomable. Why was Luonan able to predict the future? Why was he able to quickly lock onto the mastermind behind the scenes? What was the reasoning behind Luonan's ability to tear through the void? What was the origin of such a handy ability? Actually, there was a barely acceptable answer to every question. Luonan was able to survey the entire world and expose a group of people harboring evil intentions in real time. Why was he unable to discover the plot in near-Earth orbit that was only 400 kilometers away? Luonan was able to send a group of billionaires and experts in the field of distortion research to the roof of the world. What was the big deal with dealing with a falling nuclear warhead with such a method of warping space and time? As for the origin of the ability and method, everything would be fine if he pushed it to the new plane. However, the crux of the problem was never whether or not a reason could be found. Instead, it was the reason, the ability, and where the true boundaries of it were. Was this a momentary stroke of luck, or was it an inevitable outcome? Would this always be the result when they faced similar incidents in the future? This was a very serious judgment question. It determined whether they were facing a person with powerful abilities or an omniscient and omnipotent God. Of course, the possibility of the latter was far, far too low. But looking at it from a realistic point of view, it would be safer to take the attitude one would have when facing a god before the boundaries were explored. Black Lion's mind stirred slightly at this time. He suddenly understood a bit. The mastermind behind the scenes who created such a major incident might have some intentions. Where in the world were the boundaries of Luonan's ability? It wasn't just the mastermind behind the scenes. Perhaps all the magistrates of the world and even all the curious people would do everything in their power to probe. Old elves would go all out to communicate with Luonan. Frankly speaking, he had the same thoughts. As for Luonan, what would he do? Black Lion tried to put himself in Luonan's shoes, but he was unable to do so in the end. This had nothing to do with Luonan's personality. Instead, when Black Lion did some deep thinking, he discovered that he was already unable to imagine a fellow like Luonan. What he saw and felt, and what sort of thinking was formed on the basis of these feelings and experiences. Perhaps he wasn't a god, but he certainly wasn't a human. This was probably the case. Chapter 1098. Luonan's consciousness followed the basic structure of the magnetic optical mica to wander about in the vast and marvelous new world. The so-called new world was just the world he was used to seeing in the past. It was a brand new creation under the unique perception of the magnetic optical mica. Luonan shouldn't rashly describe the current situation. It had already lost its usual smoothness and tone. It had turned into countless bubble phantoms that ran along the edge of the gravitational vortex of the sun and the earth. They were warped and impacted by countless other forces. It could even be further refined into a grid of various frequency bands that interweaved with each other in various forms. Luonan didn't have the intention to investigate in detail. This was because everything he saw at this stage was the product of forcefully twisting old experiences and new horizons. He really lacked the corresponding analytical tools to make a meaningful interpretation of this new form of space, time, life, and matter. This point wasn't written in the theory of the school of fantasy. There was no clear answer in the existing database. It wasn't possible for him to obtain or extract relevant knowledge in a short period of time. He needed to adapt bit by bit and harmonize with his past experiences. Therefore, he did his best to analyze and ponder with his past experiences in order to realize an orderly connection. Even so, he still needed to receive and process a rather extensive amount of information. Reactions from all sides were basically fed back to him. Some were directly sent messages and phone calls by acquaintances. Some were collected by Luonan on his own initiative. This included the global scope and even the near-Earth orbit region that he had just barely reached. Everyone who knew him and had a conceptual understanding of the previous events radiated clear and complex signals. How to put it? Homogenization was quite serious. If one were to roughly describe it with emotions, they would basically be astonishment, fear, doubt, bewilderment. Nothing more than that. They were probably all subdued by Luo Nan's nearly inconceivable operation. Luo Nan had continued and pushed the jadeite light auction to this day. Luo Nan was a deterrent to this world. The nuclear bomb on the material plane hadn't exploded, but the mental plane seemed to have been plowed flat quite a few layers. It could be interpreted in this way for the time being. Frankly speaking, Luo Nan was a bit proud of himself. Thanks to the timely replacement of the sensing medium by the magneto-optical mica jellyfish and the expansion of the sensing range, although the information from more dimensions was much more blurry, the limits of his mental senses had expanded from the Earth's biosphere, which was rich in water vapor, to the low Earth orbit, where the air was extremely thin. Because of this, Luo Nan's warning time was longer than most people estimated. He even interfered with the situation at the end of the development. Unfortunately, limited by the fuzziness of the new sensing mode and the lack of analysis ability, the precision, accuracy, and speed of his analysis and translation were questionable. In the end, he was still one step slower, and the main cannon of the space-based platform was launched successfully. But this also left room for him to perform even more shocking moves. Luo Nan still relied on the magneto-optical mica for his second stage of operation. At the very least, he relied on it partially. At this moment, in the magnificent palace in his spiritual world, two figures became clearer and clearer. One was the magneto-optical mica, the other was the shadow cockroach. In comparison, the latter was even more agile, as if it would break through the restraints of the palace's space in the next moment and dive into the real world. Of course, it was only as if. Again, without the foundation of the material plane, no matter how clear the structure and image was, it was impossible to restore it to the level of reality. In particular, the shadow cockroach was an extremely special existence. From his experience at the relay station, Luo Nan knew that it was very difficult for this thing to survive on the material plane of the local spacetime. It simply did not belong to this spacetime. There was a saying that the shadow cockroach was not an independent life form. It was the tentacle of some terrifying demon in the spacetime of the outer realm. Only the special ability of the magneto-optical mica could open the realm gate. Only then could Luo Nan take it by surprise and throw it into the local spacetime, achieving an instantaneous spacetime cleave. At the present stage, the magneto-optical mica that Luo Nan had cultivated was merely a larva. Sorry, Luo Nan had yet to research an operational plan to open the realm gate. When all was said and done, the attack that tore through the void was just a reference to Luo Nan's past memories and the structure that appeared in the palace of the mind. Luo Nan fused his own understanding of the structure of spacetime into a successful imitation. That was all. It was because of this that the very first crack in the void was perfectly straight. It was filled with traces of artificiality. But the more time passed, the more Luo Nan was able to experience the miraculous power of the shadow cockroach crossing worlds to come like a butcher dismembering an ox. The shadow cockroach followed the warped lines of spacetime and easily tore through the relay station spacetime barrier and the bloodshed field. Therefore, the more the crack in the void extended, the more it had a bit of the charm of the shadow cockroach tearing through space at the relay station. Of course, this was all he could do for now. He still needed to carefully organize his insights in the future. Yes, this was all. In the end, Luo Nan was not muddle-headed. At the present stage, more and more people radiated emotions of shock, admiration, and fear with the passage of time. They revolved around this matter, endlessly magnifying the Luo Nan chi in their hearts. They stirred up more and more power, and in turn they were used by Luo Nan. The resources he could control grew larger and larger, forming an astonishing virtuous cycle that continued to improve. It was like an enormous engine erected on the mental plane, endlessly absorbing fuel and releasing surging power. But such power was risky in the end. If Luo Nan hadn't realized the differential coupling of the body gear and the god gear early on and formed the boundless soul cloak and the altar's spiderweb to contain excess energy as a buffer structure, he would certainly have exploded by now. Luo Nan didn't explode, safely passing through this juncture. Recently, he had made deep contact with the Abyssal Sun Wheel and the Heavenly Abyss Empire civilization. He had even borrowed the help of the Interverse Simulator to enter the dream. He had gained a thorough understanding of a series of related theories. With these theories as a guide, he finally possessed enough power to control and overturn the universe. But was he really omnipotent? Especially after his experience at the relay station, his horizons had broadened to the era of the universe, to the level of the Heavenly Abyss civilization. He couldn't help but think, this kind of power could run amok on Earth for a time. But what about in a different environment? In the light concealment galaxy, Not to mention his imitation, he had personally experienced the power of a true magnetite mica, the power of a great sovereign. Needless to say, in this vile and poisonous environment, the power of the mental side wouldn't die fast enough. Even if this was a special case, the wider interstellar civilization society didn't seem to be stable. It was just like Liang Lu's notes on the lamination interference technique. It reflected a cautious mentality. Luonan wasn't the kind of neurotic person who would be crushed by some illusory, far-sighted considerations. But in the end, he was still used to searching for a more effective frame of reference, to give himself a relatively fair judgment. The Heavenly Abyss civilization possessed a complete, precise, and clearly divided level system as a blueprint. Did he really want to degenerate to the point of living on Earth, where the system of supernatural powers was still relatively chaotic? Did he want to indulge in foolish, arrogant dreams? From Luonan's perspective, this wasn't a problem at all. He didn't need to waste energy on this. Instead, there was a thought. It was like an island during the continental movement. It gradually rose from the depths of the sea of chaos. Under the arching and polishing of this thought, it emerged more and more clearly. The environment molds people. The environment changes people. Any sort of ability would inevitably be evaluated and influenced by the larger environment. Then, when would one's own ability not be impacted by the external environment and become a body of its own? Probably to be like great monarch Chang Yishuan. She had slain gods and subdued demons in her life. After her death, she could transform into an undying plane to resist evil and poison. She could light up the star system and become a shelter for civilization. This was the only way. To put it bluntly, it was the ability to construct a world. A similar realm description had already appeared in the Innerverse simulator. But it was still too far away. Luonan wasn't prepared to think too much about this. He returned to a more direct goal. Don't even talk about a real world with its own rules. He hadn't even broken ground on a deceptive counterfeit. Mr. Luo, who could overturn heaven and earth, why don't you pinch a new plane to see? Luonan smirked. His last bit of complacency was wiped away cleanly. Then again, pondering and spurring himself on was admittedly good. But the great enemy that had always been hiding behind the scenes, the great enemy that still hadn't made his appearance. Should he also be pondered? The current situation felt a bit off course. Off course. The blood demon really enjoyed the realistic feeling of the chairs in the virtual venue, and he was quite cooperative. He didn't deliberately see through anything because of the extraordinary perception of an extraordinary. He was a human. He wanted to deceive himself and others. Zhang Yingying rolled her eyes a few times after Luonan made that prediction, which made people unable to laugh, and it came true in one fell swoop. But Luonan's side was really hard to talk about, so he simply entered the venue early to watch the excitement. Right now it really was quite lively. This was the Global Extraordinary Summit Conference that started with the death of the veteran extraordinary Gong Qi. It was a hot topic because of the new plane. It attracted the attention of practically all extraordinaries and people in power from all walks of life. It had been prepared and brewed for many days. It had gone through many twists and turns. Once it was convened, people from all walks of life spoke enthusiastically. The problem was that because of the actions of Luonan, the topic of discussion had already been distorted into something that wasn't the same. The original topic, the determination of old Mr. Gong Qi's death, was covered in a few words. Fine, Luonan didn't even have to wait. He blew himself up, but what could you do to him? The conference did say that blood relatives were allowed to take revenge, but was this because Gong Qi's bloodline hadn't fallen thoroughly enough? As for the topic of the new plane that was supposed to be the most explosive, the main character didn't come at all. Abner, who was presiding over the conference, spoke a few repetitive words. He chewed on his words, changed his words, and repeated them dozens of times. There was no real meaning to his words. Actually, if someone dared to break the topic, it wasn't like they couldn't discuss it. However, the scene of the world's roll call and the one-way trip to the roof of the world were still vivid in their minds. The chaotic yet incomparably sincere auction was still going on, constantly setting new highs. Not to mention there was an attempted nuclear explosion over at Ban City. The explosive news diluted the explosive topic. It was like using a nuclear explosion to suppress nuclear radiation. It sounded absurd and ridiculous, but it also possessed a high degree of rationality. Therefore, the Rare Summit Conference quickly turned into an analysis meeting of the attempted nuclear explosion. This was an unforeseen event that absolutely wasn't on the agenda. It also showed that Abner had completely lost control of this conference. Yes, from Blood Demon's point of view, Abner had never spent any effort to control anything. This veteran extraordinary, who had already mutated into a standard political animal, seemed to want this discussion to continue. He wanted to help Blood Demon gather some information and ideas so that he could sort out a train of thought amidst this chaotic mess. Therefore, the discussion in the virtual conference hall continued on without the main topic. It caused a summit conference that involved key events and scarce resources. It should have been serious and tense. It should have even been filled with the light of blades and shadows of blood. However, it turned into a tea party. At most, it was an academic seminar. Blood Demon confirmed the time. The hour hand was nearing 11 o'clock. The conference had already gone on for nearly an hour. The discussion regarding Luo Nan was still in the ascendant stage. It seemed that it wouldn't hurt to talk for an entire night. Several core big shots, including Abner, had tacitly agreed. Clearly they weren't just interested. They were also waiting. They were waiting for the arrival of the fellow who could make this conference truly meaningful. While he was thinking, colorful light gathered to the side. A new projection cut in. This projection was guided by the conference system. It directly entered the innermost round table sequence. Blood Demon's mind was roused. He's here. Within the virtual conference hall, the participants all received the relevant information, whether it was through watching or through the system's prompts. Their thoughts converged in the first instant. That's right. It was Luo Nan. This young man, who easily pulled apart the age gap between him and everyone else in the conference hall, appeared in his position. His position reflected the details. Luo Nan's position was on the opposite side of Abner, the convener and host of the conference. The two's positions were slightly staggered to avoid being directly opposite each other. Luo Nan gave the opposite position to the two members of the Amaterasu order. It was worth mentioning that this position adjustment was made urgently after the nuclear bomb incident. This wasn't just a recognition of Luo Nan's position, it was also Abner's attitude. Only the heavens knew whether or not Luo Nan would be able to accept this little detail. From the looks of it, this young man's focus was clearly not here. It was no wonder that True God and the Pope didn't appear at this conference. The designed opposition and shield were already meaningless. But it was the absence of these two that made people have no choice but to consider whether or not a victor had already been decided behind the anticlimax conflict. It didn't matter if it was in a symbolic or practical sense. Everyone in the conference hall had their own distracting thoughts. Luo Nan, who had entered the virtual conference hall, was also adapting to this new environment. At the very least, he had to convince himself that this scientific illusion was real. He looked around and immediately saw the Blood Demon beside him. He smiled at him and the latter raised his eyebrows in response. "What's the topic?" Luo Nan asked casually. He didn't expect the clamor in the entire virtual conference hall to quickly recede in these short 2 or 3 seconds until there was nothing left. Only his own voice reverberated in the room. Chapter 1099. Luo Nan did not expect that the atmosphere within the conference hall would be this sensitive, that he would become the focus of everyone in an instant. Then again, this was to be expected. After all, he was the focus and core of all the recent problems of the world. Right now, he was quite dissatisfied with his current state. Luckily, he had acted as the host of the auction not too long ago, so he had retained some of his habits. He raised his hand and used a familiar tone to greet everyone. "Sorry, something came up, I'm late." The true host, Abner, displayed his abilities at this time. He revealed a smile and chose a not-so-neutral form of address. "Everyone knows the reason why Professor Luo is late. It really is an unstoppable force." "Who said that? Didn't we just endure it?" A fellow spoke in a roundabout manner. It seemed like he was targeting Abner, but it was also a bit provocative to Luo Nan. In short, it was a tone that made both sides unhappy. "Xiao Sato is an old lecherous man." Blood Demon promptly reminded him from the side. "He holds the title of Deputy Secretary General of Headquarters, but he actually walks closer to the capital side." "I know. He's always been neither lecherous nor masculine." Luo Nan knew that this fashionista had never gotten along with Her Majesty Empress Wu. He didn't play a good role in the appraisal meeting last time either. Luo Nan only cared about recognizing people. He didn't care about anything else. Abner acted as if he didn't hear anything. He signaled for the Secretary General behind him to step forward. "Roman?" Romanus didn't speak. He didn't have any expression. He just sent Luo Nan a draft of the meeting minutes he had done earlier through the conference system. Luo Nan raised his head to look at this extraordinary whose name sounded a bit similar to his own. He had heard of Romanus before. He was one of the new extraordinaries in recent years. He was said to be an astute and low-key fellow. Now it seemed that he really was low-key. "You guys chat. I'm going to take a look." These weren't polite words. Luo Nan still needed to adapt to his new environment. He definitely wouldn't have received this treatment before tonight. He would have been greeted with questions the moment he entered the conference hall. Now he took the initiative to withdraw from the focal point. It was as if he was giving face. What Luo Nan needed to do right now was indeed related to face. He needed to clearly distinguish the faces and basic information of these extraordinaries who stood at the peak of the world. Truthfully speaking, there were over 100 people in this high-level conference, including the spectators. For Luo Nan, who wasn't good at interpersonal relationships, it was a bit difficult to clearly remember so many faces. At this time you need a deck of cards. Blood Demon sent over an electronic file. It was a copy of the classic extraordinary poker card set that he claimed he was going to release. Yes, it was the version that included Gong Chi and Jin Tong. He flipped through it and found that the index was quite complete. After a brief search, he found out that Romanus was the 2 of spades. He belonged to a more comprehensive or dominant extraordinary. Sacido, on the other hand, was the 3 of clubs. He was a classic psychic. Not only did Blood Demon provide the information, he also took on the responsibility of explaining. Basically, the circle in the middle of the round table is arranged according to the 16 strongest extraordinaries. Of course, some people basically won't appear in this kind of occasion, so it's only natural that there will be more and more people. Just as Blood Demon had said, there were 2 criteria for the strongest 16. One was to include all the Flower A cards and character cards, and the other was to slightly relax the criteria, and also include the number 10 card for even goalkeepers. No matter which criteria were used, the core area of the round table was occupied by these 16 to 20 people in this highest level meeting. The other people's seats were more random. Plus, this was a virtual venue. Everyone here wasn't a primary school student, so the seating arrangement was even more chaotic. Under Blood Demon's intimate explanation, Luo Nan immediately gave up on the delusion of recognizing everyone. He just looked at the card deck and examined the people in the core circle first. It didn't matter if there were 20 people or 16 people. Not everyone was present. Luo Nan counted. There were only 18 seats in the core circle, but there were only 13 people, including himself, that was all. The Ability User Society occupied a considerable portion of these people. Abner, the current president of headquarters, the convener of the meeting, the host, and the king of spades. Vice President Malouin, who Luo Nan had fought with for a short period of time. He was a powerful fleshly expert. He was the Jack of Hearts. Constance Daley, the mystic and mental side. He was the master of enchantments. He was the Jack of clubs. Yes, President Ouyang could be counted as well. This was the Jack of spades. Luo Nan waved his hand, and Ouyang Chen adjusted his glasses and smiled in response. Her Majesty Empress Wu was behind President Ouyang this time. Her head was still lowered as she read her book. She didn't pay attention to Luo Nan at all. The remaining people Luo Nan was more familiar with were Blood Demon and Black Lion. One of these two had the 10 of hearts and the other had the 10 of diamonds. Both of them had the nature of a goalkeeper. Black Lion was a bit further away, but he waved his hand at Luo Nan in greeting. Luo Nan wasn't familiar with the remaining people, but even with his meager knowledge, he had long heard of their great names. Of course, there were two leaders of secret orders among them. Impartial First Ablatum, the Ace of Spades. Speaking of which, this wasn't the first time Luo Nan had dealings with this person. Back at the flagship store of Frost River Reality, when he wiped out the main force of the Order of Justice's branch, Luo Nan had made contact with this person through space. Of course, President Ouyang and Her Majesty Empress Wu were the main combatants back then. But who would have thought that this powerful ruler of the most powerful secret order was actually a woman who looked gentle and amiable? Directions were not distinguishable within the virtual venue. If the host, Abner, was facing the north, then the impartial First Ablatum was facing the west. He was facing Luo Nan at a small angle. He cast his gaze over at this time. It seemed that he was observing the changes in Luo Nan's expression. He was extremely focused and interested. High Lord Secret Deed, Ace of Hearts. This old gentleman looked to be quite old. His hair was snow white and the quality of his hair was quite hard. It stood up very tenaciously. A white beard grew by the side of his mouth, and it was neatly groomed. He looked hale and hearty. He kept flipping through the materials. His eyelids were drooping and his expression was calm. Luonan couldn't see anything else. The only thing that was rather eye-catching was the several dark lines on his face. They looked like faded tattoos, but they didn't look like patterns. As for why Luonan could see them so clearly, aside from the degree of restoration of the virtual venue itself, it was also because this old gentleman was on the other side of Luonan. He was sandwiched between Blood Demon and Luonan. Even though the diameter of the central round table was enormous, the distance between each side should be quite wide. But Luonan thought about Blood Demon's previous proposal, which was flatly rejected by Blood Demon. Luonan couldn't help but feel that something was off. High Lord Secret Deed minded his own business, flipping through the materials. This gave Luonan a buffer and leeway to think. They were both old men. The one who was as old as High Lord Secret Deed or even older should be Necromancer. This person was the J of clubs. She looked to be a level lower than the Junior Constance, but she was quite a dangerous character. Her head was nearly half bald. She had very few strands of hair, and she didn't even have many eyebrows left. She glared at Luonan with a very unfriendly gaze. Then there was Mao Xingye, Director Mao. In a sense, he was the most powerful capitalist in the world. He was the K of Hearts. Luonan had never interacted with him before, but he barely knew him. There were also two other people whom Luonan had never met before. One of them was the number 2 figure of the Order of Justice, High Priest Lanier. He was the K of Clubs. Legend had it that he was a powerful extraordinary who specialized in entering dreams. He was able to steal away a person's soul while they were asleep. The other person was a powerful person who belonged to the Eye of Secret Deed in name. He was the emissary of Hell, Apollon. His card position was the J of Diamonds. He looked very young, around 30 years old at most. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was so gloomy and cold that it made people tremble from the bottom of their hearts. Luonan had heard that this person was absolutely not someone who was easy to deal with. He was normally arrogant and unruly. He always listened to orders but never listened to orders. Luonan didn't know why he had come to the conference today. As for the few people who didn't come, Luonan flipped through the deck of cards. He determined that they either belonged to the Star Alliance and the military, possessing the nature of public authority. This included Lieutenant General Joseph, the cornerstone of the Aerospace Army, and Dongxing, who had been overseeing in city for many years, and the retired high-ranking officer of the Star Alliance, Bai Hao. They could come or not come. Or they were powerful people from the wilderness who would never participate in the conference. This included the clown Robbie, the formidable Russ Steele of the Northern Territory. Oh, and there was also Poseidon. As for the true gods and the Pope, they didn't come today. That was a different story. While Luonan was sizing up these people were sizing him up as well. These people weren't the only ones sizing up Luonan. No matter what Luonan said just now, he was still the focal point of the entire venue. The heated discussion from before did not come back to life because of his suggestion of everyone continuing. The venue returned to silence once more. It was hard to stir up any more waves. There was no other direction other than to officially proceed. Only now did Luonan have the leisure to look at the agenda. The first 2 items on the agenda were related to Gong Qi, the search for the murderer and the filling of the power vacuum after Gong Qi's death. Both of them could be considered resolved. Next was the third item. The seemingly academic item proposed by Lord Secret Deed. Luonan's gaze shifted to the side. Lord Secret Deed was still flipping through the documents in his hands. He was calm, focused, and solemn. Abner began to push forward. Then we will now move on to the third item on the agenda. Lord Secret Deed, please inform us of the latest observations and research results of the abyssal region. The data inside corresponds to the special nature of supernatural powers. It is highly specialized and exceedingly precious. The relevant documents have already been sent to everyone before the conference. Do you still want to read them? Abner displayed an exceptionally respectful attitude, even though the two were about the same age. Lord Secret Deed shook his head slightly. There's no need to read them. Those who are interested will read them. Those who aren't interested won't read them. You won't understand them even if you read them. Professor Luo, have you read them? Luonan never expected that his first conversation with Lord Secret Deed would be like this. He blinked his eyes. I read a bit but not in detail. Yes, it's as you said. I really don't understand them. For example? Lord Secret Deed inquired. Luonan shot a glance at Blood Demon. He really suspected that it was because he refused to cooperate with this group of people and was embarrassed in front of them. Of course, this was just a thought. Luonan wasn't lying. Under Blood Demon's strong recommendation, Luonan really did find the time to look at Lord Secret Deed's draft motion. He had a memory of the continuously changing trends of the abyssal region, as well as some numerical descriptions. It was precisely because it was too numerical that it made it hard for him, and probably the vast majority of people, to have an intuitive impression of it. Luonan laughed. Actually, I hope to have an intuitive schematic diagram, or a clear conclusion. Conjectures are fine too. For now, I have an impression of a concept called a trend line. That's what it's called, right? In the end, I still don't quite understand what kind of substantive meaning it corresponds to. It corresponds to the relationship between the aberration process of the Earth's biosphere and the change in a certain amount of radiation in the abyssal region. Due to the complexity of the abyssal region, it is very difficult to carry out precise quantification. One can only carry out a comprehensive consideration of the relevant elements and observe the general trends and dynamics. Luonan actually understood this rather awkward phrase. While he was muttering to himself because of this meaning, Lord Secret Deed continued to explain. This concept originates from a hypothesis. Suppose that the chaotic energy turbulence of the abyssal region, or a certain element within it, is the main factor that triggered the age of aberration. Moreover, it is still in effect. The direction of observation and research is to find this element and conduct qualitative and quantitative analysis. Luonan frowned. This hypothesis seems to be, the results of observation aren't able to prove this hypothesis. However, we have indeed discovered a subtle correlation between the intensity and nature of the energy turbulence of the abyssal region and the current aberration process. The amount of radiation in the abyssal region has increased, and the rate of aberration infection in the Earth's biosphere has also increased. The trend line has increased. The amount of radiation in the abyssal region has decreased, and the rate of aberration infection has also begun to decrease. The trend line has decreased. There is a clear positive correlation. It's just that we aren't sure which is the cause and which is the effect. In particular, if we believe in the logic that the exhaust emissions from the breathing of humans and livestock will cause global warming, then it will be even harder to distinguish the position of cause and effect. The master of the secret deed spoke unhurriedly. He took care of the priority and urgency extremely well. It was very easy for people to understand the key points within his words. Luonan immediately knew that this old gentleman was more inclined to believe that the changes in the abyssal region were the cause and the aberration was the effect. It was just that he didn't explicitly state it due to his strictness. The perfectly good agenda inexplicably turned into a private conversation between the master of the secret deed and Luonan. However, the people present were able to accept this mode. Any situation that made it convenient for them to observe and examine Luonan was acceptable. Needless to say, the master of the secret deed touched upon the two explosive topics of the abyssal region and aberration. Luonan's interest was piqued. Let's not talk about the observation of the abyssal region. The aberration process of the Earth's biosphere. How is it quantified? Of course it's the number and spread range of the aberration infected. Blood Demon opened his mouth to speak in support. He exposed his position in an instant. The number. Is there any data? The statistical data is basically reliable? Blood Demon answered, but he himself wasn't too sure. After all, the current research on aberration was not deep enough. Traditional statistical techniques and sample selection might not conform to reality. Luonan didn't pursue the master of the secret deed. Mathematics wasn't his strong suit. He simply raised a question. Speaking of which, looking at the master of the secret deed's appearance, he didn't really want to give him or the other extraordinaries present a course in statistical analysis. Everyone was very realistic. It was just as Luonan had said before. They just wanted to hear the conclusion. Guesses were fine. Then the performance of the trend line is. Luonan was suspicious of asking a question he already knew the answer to. It continues to rise. The master of the secret deed raised his head. His gaze started from Luonan's face, sweeping across the entire round table and even the venue. The data for this material only ends on the 31st of December 2096. In fact, since the beginning of this year, the trend line has completely entered an exponential growth mode. It behaves more and more like a virus that has gone out of control. It should be said that the range and quantity of the infection have already gone out of control. Is there any clear evidence? Abner asked with a frown. The master of the secret deed didn't respond. But on the other side of the master of the secret deed, the young white man who had been sitting quietly all this time, the emissary of hell Apollon, casually raised his hand. Here. Mr. Apollon? Abner's frown deepened. Apollon raised his head. His eyes were like burning charcoal, radiating a heat that made one's heart palpitate. His words were ice cold to the bone. The measurable infection rate of the citizens has exceeded 10%. It has exceeded the scope of control. Starting today, Ha City will abandon all measures to control the aberration infection. This will save medical and survival resources to deal with the following events. That's all. Chapter 1100. The conference hall was a bit numb for a time. There were quite a few people who needed to adjust their state of mind in time. Many people had seen Lord Secretdeed's proposal, and they had watched the exchange between Lord Secretdeed and Luo Nan as if it were a lively event. The impact was not that strong. After all, they had experienced similar scenes many times. In recent years, both the inner world and the secular world revolved around the problem of distortion. They carried out in-depth discussions and even attacked each other. Some people said that the distortion continued to deepen. Some people said that the situation was turning for the better. Everyone had their reasons and everyone had their reasons. There had never been a clear winner. Including the group of extraordinaries present, most of them still viewed the problem of the aberrations as a politicized operation of an academic problem. Throughout the year, they wished they could say that the aberrations had gone out of control at least once a day. It was nothing more than a way to fight for resources and guide them in the right direction. Over the years, from top to bottom, this was basically how things had been played. It had become a routine. But at this time, someone suddenly said, "The wolf is really here." Even if the wolf's bloody maw was right in front of their faces, everyone had to rub their eyes, right? Most people shifted their attention to Apollon for the first time ever since Luo Nan arrived at the conference hall. This powerful genius called himself the emissary of hell. Actually, if Luo Nan hadn't created so many explosive topics in the past few hours, Apollon's participation in the summit conference would have become quite the explosive point. This young extraordinaire was born in the new continent and had been involved in gangs since he was young. He had a wealth of experience and his methods were ruthless. He had made countless enemies but none of them were his match. He had once single-handedly founded a secret order, the Apocalypse, and was honored as the Son of God. Perhaps the Son of Satan? His title wasn't important. What was important was that he was a true awakened talent. His talent was so great that no one knew when he became an extraordinary. Apollon's greatest achievement so far was to unite the gangs, vagrants, and other messy fellows of the new continent. He used messy methods to gain substantial control over Eagle City in the south-central part of the new continent. He renamed it Armageddon Town, and the battlefield of the legendary Armageddon War was shortened to Ha City. It was also the world-famous city of Sin. The Star Alliance Committee actually pinched their noses and accepted it. Perhaps that place wasn't any better to begin with? It was also possible that the High Lord of the secret contract had promptly challenged him and won the battle, putting the reins on him. His gaze crossed the central round table and stared at a person on the side. It's not just Tin City. Brahma City has maliciously used phenomena such as the red tide to attack Tin City's defense line. However, their methods are crude and terrible. On the other hand, Shakar, Dem, and the others have taken advantage of administrative and religious convenience to carry out improper propaganda about the aberration, calling it Brahma's test. It has become a trend in the subcontinent. The degree of infection in Brahma City can only be higher than in Tin City. You're talking nonsense. Today, the eloquent guru Dem of Brahma City was absent for some reason. Only Shakar, who was known as the Grandmaster of Breathing, had come. Though Shakar was an expert in breathing techniques, his eloquence wasn't that great. He just gave a dry reply and didn't say anything else. The extraordinaries in the meeting had their own judgment as to whether or not they believed him. There was no need for others to do it. However, someone discovered at this time that the most active people in the meeting room had practically formed a string. They were roughly in the position opposite of Abner. Lord Mitchison and Luo Nan were in the middle. Blood Demon and Apollon were on either side. It was hard not to think. Do these people have some sort of tacit understanding? It was at this time that Lord Mitchison slightly shifted his gaze. He bypassed Apollon on the left and cast his gaze towards the next seat. He didn't say anything, but the one he was looking at, Black Lion, had an ugly expression on his face. One could read the meaning of, "A pot is falling from the sky," from his face. But he couldn't fool this topic even if he played the fool. In the end he could only spread his hands. "Don't look at me. You all know the situation over there." That was right. Things had gone out of control over there long ago. It seemed like the tacit connection was going to continue to extend. Lord Mitchison took the initiative to call a halt at this time. He called a halt by turning his head to seek Luo Nan's opinion. I'm afraid we'll stray off topic if we continue talking. Luo Nan's mind had wandered a bit when Apollon and the others had voiced their confirmation one after another. Lord Mitchison had called his attention back. Lord Mitchison laughed. I don't really understand what you're talking about when it comes to distortion. But it's not purely a matter of natural phenomena and biology. There's also a bit of sociological probing. Yes, there's also a warning. It should be done. Blood Demon gave him a thumbs up. Luo Nan rolled his eyes back. It should be done like this. Lord Mitchison placed the information in his hands on the virtual desktop. Speaking up to this point, I'm very apologetic. The topic text pursued objectivity, so it didn't elaborate much on the practical meaning. Of course, when I formed the text, I did indeed have the intention of deliberately simplifying it. Otherwise, I'm afraid that this topic would have to undergo more careful discussions and require more extensive participation. The accuracy could be increased. But if I did that, there wouldn't be enough time. Lord Mitchison looked all around. He was neither fast nor slow, communicating with practically every extraordinary present with his gaze. From this moment on, he had completely taken away Abner's role as host. He made the topic of the conference change in the direction he wished for. The rising trend line is the truth reflected in the data. The loss of control in Ha City, Tin City, and South Central Africa is the truth of social governance. But they aren't comprehensive. There are many people in the conference room right now. It can still be said that the loopholes in the defense lines of relatively backward and chaotic regions aren't much. After all, the current state of autonomy of the city-states and the restriction of the flow of population make it so that the predicament of 2 or 3 nodes won't affect the overall situation of human society. I don't want to refute this. After all, this is a complicated problem of social governance. It's more appropriate to hand it over to a more professional person to handle. There should be people here who have a bigger headache than me. However, the rising trend line still has other effects. It affects us, ability users like us, and there aren't any defense lines or nodes because it directly affects us. Almost as soon as Lord Mitchison finished his sentence, Wan Luhua, who had been sitting quietly in the area directly behind him, spoke in a timely manner. Since the second half of January, the 4th phase of the Grandmaster of Combat project that I'm hosting has reached 7 people with physical awakening. The probability of awakening has increased by 600% compared to the same period last year. Of course, this is also because there was only 1 awakening last year. The success rate was too low. However, the period from January to April is indeed the period with the highest number of awakened people since the establishment of the Grandmaster of Combat project. The frequency of their appearance has even exceeded that of the original golden period. At the same time, in the collaborative project with the military's Team AB, a new round of experiments has a high chance of helping a burner become an extraordinary. The results will probably be out in the first half of the year. Is it Tianbang? Someone asked. Wan Luhua did not explicitly state it. He directly summarized, compared to the previous 3 phases, our training method has improved, but it isn't decisive. We have to consider the influence of the external environment. Isn't that a good thing? Marlin, the first vice president of the association, joked with Blood Demon. It's just that the release date of the new edition of Deck of Cards has to be pushed back. Do you have the cash flow? Blood Demon replied with a chuckle. Lord Mitchison's fingertips lightly tapped on the table, just like in the real world. In the midst of the tapping sound he said softly, "That's the good side." However, the spiritual side that is more closely connected to the environment of the abyss, especially the spiritual side of the architect and above, doesn't seem to be that ideal. Don't you feel it? Marlin opened his mouth subconsciously, but no sound came out. He turned to look at Abner beside him. When he did not get a clear hint, he looked at Constance, who was on the other side. The latter's face was still covered under the hood, so nothing could be seen. However, his slender fingers were intertwining subconsciously, and the speed was getting faster and faster. Marlin pursed his lips. All he heard was Lord Mitchison speak at his usual speed. Since January 1st, there have been over 70 people of the architect and above who have suffered the backlash of the abyss during their regular cultivation. The most trouble has occurred when experiencing the turbulent interference of the abyss, and the most obvious. Next is the attempt at the out-of-body state. In addition, Professor Luo, old Yu's body hasn't been too well recently? Luo Nan spent half a second to match old you and he nodded silently. Psychics are too sensitive. Their skeletal structures are relatively weak, so they are easily affected. Also, Morgana on your side. Who was Morgana? Luo Nan was baffled when he saw the Death Shaman's gloomy and miserable gaze shoot over. Oh, it's this one. The Death Shaman did not speak, but under these circumstances, not speaking was a tacit agreement. It was a bit far-fetched to talk about the cultivation data of the architect in Old You. But when it came to the Death Shaman, with his status as an extraordinary, the nature of the matter was completely different. Noise gradually rose in the conference hall. During this time, another person asked a question. It was Mao Jingye, who sat diagonally across from Luo Nan, to the side of the empty seat of the Pope of the 100 Gatherings. The Lord has been emphasizing the point of January 1st because of the light of the polar domain. Lord Secret Deed answered as if it was a matter of course, and Luo Nan's eyelids twitched a bit. However, what the High Lord of Secret Deed said was completely different from what Luo Nan first thought. The first light of the polar domain occurred in the early 50s of this century. To be precise, it should be in the year 52? Lord Secret Deed asked for the opinions of others. The only people present who could respond to him were Abner and the Death Shaman. The Death Shaman looked at him with cold eyes, but Abner nodded. It was in the year 52. It's just that the inner world had yet to take shape at that time. The cultivation of ability users had just begun, so there weren't many who could sense it. There were practically no living ones. Abner subconsciously looked at Luo Nan when he spoke to this point. Gong Chi, who had once experienced it, had been erased by this person. Lord Secret Deed nodded slightly. From then on, from my personal experience, Earth really did become more and more suitable for cultivation. It wasn't just because everyone had free time after the war. Another 7 or 8 years passed. It was the year 59, right? In the year 59, Morgana, you psychics were the first to discover the abyssal region. Then people like me also came into contact with it. The Death Shaman's stiff, wrinkled face twitched for a moment. That was definitely not a good memory for her. Lord Secret Deed also sighed with emotion. It's truly marvelous. Why is there such a level and such a form of power? It easily swallowed up ignorant people, yet it pushed us to knock on the threshold of the limits of the human body. Did it always exist while we were ignorant? Or did it only complete its primitive accumulation at that time and truly appear? Chapter 1101. No one could answer this question. The High Lord of Secret Deed did not expect anyone to give him an answer. He just continued to speak unhurriedly. The Abyss region is already like this, let alone the polar domain. In fact, if it wasn't for the first light of polar domain incident, how would ignorant people like us know that outside the Abyss region, there was such a seemingly pure and illusory, yet obscure and unexplainable level? Most of the people present were distressed. This was especially so for the spiritual type transcendents. Basically, they could break through the influence of the turbulence of the Abyss region and enter the polar domain. In fact, this was one of the most advanced techniques when fighting against opponents of the same level. It was very difficult for the power stirred up in the Abyss region to effectively affect the polar domain. Although the structure of the polar domain itself did not possess direct power, it was especially easy to cause resonance in the Abyss region, achieving the effect of unifying thousands. However, the polar domain was illusory and difficult to rely on, let alone the structure. There were very few who could achieve this. Because of this, when Luo Yuan's dimensional crossbow appeared, even if he had never been known for his extraordinary power, he was immediately promoted to the top of the transcendence. In any case, the polar domain represented the highest level of the inner world, whether it was in cultivation or research. Although this field of research was intentionally or unintentionally put aside most of the time. The High Lord of Secret Deed continued this practice and did not put too much effort into the polar domain. Soon he returned to a more realistic scale. In the next 40 years, the number of ability users grew steadily, and the number of architects who could use the power of the Abyss region also continued to increase. With the architects, there were transcendents who could break through the limits. This was a seemingly smooth upward curve. This process is not reflected in today's meeting documents. It is true that we did not have effective observation conditions and quantification methods in the early days. What I have said is just speculation. It is just that this speculation is more in line with my intuition. I think everyone here feels the same. No one refuted, so the High Lord of Secret Deed continued. We can say that since the appearance of the Abyss region, it has maintained a relatively stable state of interaction with the real world for a long time, in a plateau period. At least from the late 1980s when I began to consciously observe and record until now, it has mostly been like this. There have been a few small fluctuations in the middle, but almost all of them corresponded to specific events. This kind of artificial disturbance, to put it bluntly, is just a slightly stronger noise and has almost no effect on the trend line. Until January 1st of this year, when the second light of the polar domain appeared. The participants exchanged glances subtly or exchanged information directly under the table in other ways. Unexpectedly, the High Lord of Secret Deed added another sentence. Perhaps the white nightmare from 10 days ago should also be counted in as well. Luonan blinked. There's also a daytime nightmare? Many people's interest rose once again. Speaking of the light of the polar domain, it was true that the level of the incident was extremely high, and it had also caused quite a bit of disturbance in the inner world. But after all, it was something that had happened almost half a year ago. In terms of freshness, how could it compare to the daytime nightmare incident that had stirred up more than half of the earth? Death, which did not have to act, her drooping eyelids were also half closed. She squinted her eyes and stared at him. Daytime nightmare? Have you figured out the source? No, I didn't. Its origin and related mechanism of action were not so easy to confirm. Now we can confirm two things. The first is the impact on the spiritual level. Of course. The second is that it didn't go through the amplification and bonus of the abyss region. It also didn't have any obvious external effects. It directly burst forth from within the sea of consciousness. The High Lord of Secret Deed spoke, but he looked at Luonan. According to Professor Luo's cage theory, the sea of consciousness is nothing more than the interaction between the self-cages of humans. There is nothing else besides this. According to this theory, such an intense impact couldn't have been a consciousness resonance of all the humans of the entire world, right? Luonan laughed, but he did not give a clear response. It was impossible for him to explain to the group of extraordinaries present that it was because he had accidentally triggered the enormous information of the Sunwheel Extreme Prison. He himself was unable to bear it, so he opened the floodgates to release the floodwaters from the hidden dropper, buried in the spiderweb of the altar. But at this time, a similar thought inevitably emerged in his mind. Is this old man targeting me because he failed to cooperate with me? The High Lord of Secret Deed didn't really want Luonan to explain. He just spoke his own opinion. If it wasn't resonance, then the so-called daytime nightmare was certainly an external effect. It was just that the source of the light of the polar domain could be barely confirmed. Its method of use was more hidden. Of course, it also possessed the power to shake the world. The daytime nightmare can affect billions of living beings on the planet at the same time. The light of the polar domain can reach far and wide. It can radiate all the way to Europa's forward operating base and even the distant starry sky. I don't find it strange at all that the light of the polar domain drives the trend line to rise and fall. What's strange is that they actually don't have a direct connection to the abyssal region. Then the possibility of the so-called abyssal region-specific radiation coming from itself is quite questionable. And if we consider the interstellar level, then the main cause of the change in the trend line can be attributed to the biological influence on Earth. There is an insurmountable chasm within. It's like human breathing causing global warming. The corner of the High Lord of Secret Deed's lips split open amidst his white stubble. Rather than this, I would rather believe that there is an external source of radiation. An enormous source of radiation is continuously drawing closer to us and displaying its effect. All right. The High Lord of Secret Deed wanted to directly overrule the abyssal region-specific radiation and the abyssal region-specific radiation. He wanted to determine them as the result and not the cause? Or could it be that he was just more interested in the source of radiation? At this moment, even though the High Lord of Secret Deed was the main character, at least half of the people in the venue turned their gazes to Luonan. This was because everyone naturally believed that the High Lord of Secret Deed suddenly tossed out the setting of an external source of radiation and the complete overthrow of the cause and effect of the trend line. It simply pointed to the new plane behind Luonan. Luonan frowned. But it wasn't because the theory of a source of radiation was seriously disadvantageous to him. It was because of another reason. Blood Demon didn't know what Luonan was thinking. He gave Luonan a meaningful glance in the venue and sent him private messages under the stage. Listen down. Listen down. Listen down. Luonan's brows slightly relaxed as he smiled at Blood Demon. But he soon retracted his smile. He just heard the High Lord of Secret Deed continue speaking with a calm tone. If there is such a source of radiation, Actually, I would rather believe that there are multiple sources of radiation. The death which knocked on the table, clearly expressing her impatience. Secret deed, I didn't come here to listen to your big conjecture of the century. What in the world do you mean? The High Lord of Secret Deed wasn't annoyed. He laughed. You've lived for a long time. You've seen many things. You're very accurate. You need to let others see things a bit more clearly. What I mean is that in a short period of less than 40 years, we are unable to determine whether or not the light of polar domain is the periodic effect of the same source of radiation. Not to mention the daytime nightmare. Its nature is quite different from the light of polar domain. Actually, the essence is the same. It's just that the channel of effect is different. At the very least, this was the case for the last 2 times. Luonan corrected himself in his mind, but he had to explain clearly why the wraith sign guided in the light of the polar domain, but the light of the polar domain was guided in through the misty maze, and the light of the day nightmare. Well, the latter part made more or less sense, but he was unable to understand the former logic. No matter what, this deviation was beneficial to Luonan at his current stage. He could shut his mouth, but he didn't feel too comfortable doing so. It was the feeling of going against one's will when encountering a wrong question. Well, the root of the problem wasn't here. While Luonan was calculating in his mind, the High Lord of Secret Deed gradually entered the main topic. The first light of polar domain occurred 15 years after the distortion pollution, 10 years after the end of the Third War, and 7 years after the appearance of the Abyss region. During this time, it was gradually possible for human cultivation and self-evolution. Of course, there was also the Deep Blue World. The Death Witch's drooping eyelids froze a bit when she heard this sensitive word. There were quite a few others who had the same reaction. However, the High Lord of Secret Deed's words flowed smoothly, not giving others the chance to interrupt. That was the first time we had the concept of a plane in reality. Even though it was just a legend floating on the ocean at that time. There's no smoke without fire. There's no smoke without fire. There's no smoke without fire. I'm inclined to believe that the source of the first light of polar domain was there. As a plane of space-time, the node of its appearance is extremely close to the origin of the distortion. It also overlaps with a series of subsequent events. More importantly, it has this mass. Of course, this is just a guess. The atmosphere within the conference room was roughly equivalent to the tense atmosphere when Luonan and Black Lion first chatted, on the pool deck multiplied by 10. The participants really didn't expect Old Man Secret Deed, who was about to attack Luonan's face, to suddenly turn around and stab Li Wei in the chest. Even Black Lion, Wang Yong and the others who had experienced similar events, weren't any better. This was different from the influence of Luonan's attitude at the time. It must be known that the Eye of Secret Deed stood behind the High Lord of Secret Deed. Even if it was the weakest organization among the 3 great secret orders, that was only relative. Secret Deed, Secret Deed. Who knew who else signed a contract with the High Lord of Secret Deed besides Apollon and Wan Luhua? If this person wanted to make things difficult for Li Wei. The group of extraordinaries were frantically adding scenes in their minds. The High Lord of Secret Deed floated over in the next second. As for the second light of polar domain at the beginning of the year, the Deep Blue World and the local spacetime have already been anchored to completion. It has been relatively stable in recent years, so the possibility isn't high. But there are others. For example, Professor Luo's new plane. Luonan furrowed his brows and pondered for a long time. He raised his head to glance when he heard someone mention him, but he didn't respond. The High Lord of Secret Deed skipped over again, but there are many other things that point in the same period. For example, the research that I and a few friends jointly invested in. It involves the species in the wilderness surrounding Spring City and Xia City, as well as the changes in the spacetime environment. There's also the Gate of Truth that the Order of Justice once clamored about. I don't know if these recent hot topics point to one place, 2 places, or multiple places. But they can indeed serve as a few omens. They can strengthen the possibility of the idea of an external source of radiation. Alright, this was very objective and fair. The participants were alarmed for no reason. Then again, why was everyone so sensitive? Why did they think of the possibility of falling out with Li Wei at every turn? Also, why did High Lord Secret Deed drag Abner back to the topic that he had just avoided with great difficulty? In the end, who was on the same side as who? And at this time, Blood Demon, who was clearly suspected to be an accomplice, opened his mouth once more. He clicked his tongue repeatedly. Old man, you're getting old. You're getting more and more wordy. After listening to you for half a day, you've deviated from the main topic. I clearly remember that you were talking about the distortion going out of control. In the end, after talking for so long, it seemed like you were trying to find the source, but the result is still so unclear. Give me a solution. Blood Demon's technique of playing the supporting role was quite stiff. He forcefully pulled the topic back. However, this indeed represented the thoughts of a considerable portion of the participants. Amidst the discussions in the venue, Mao Jingye, Chairman Mao, frowned and said, "My lord, do you mean to investigate the source of the radiation and see if it's a new plane, or something deeper? But this doesn't solve the real problem." As the world's most successful extraordinary businessman, Mao Jingye's thoughts were clear and sharp. So what if we can find the source? A radiation source that could change the Earth's environment could be considered a so-called plane, for the time being. It could not be pushed away or sealed, let alone changed its nature. So what if it was found? This is a threat similar to the Great Ice Age or the impact of asteroids. Can humans avoid or reverse such threats with their current development? Of course not. Lord Secret Deed answered calmly. He even added, "Actually, the possibility of the distortion going out of control is the cause of all changes up until now. It can't be said that it's completely impossible." Death which sneered, "Then what the hell is this long list of things?" Lord Secret Deed faintly smiled. He was about to speak when someone raised his hand. Such a habitual action could only be Zio's student, Luo Nan. "How about I say a few words?" Luo Nan's voice wasn't loud, but his gesture of raising his hand was a bit more eye-catching. When the participants saw and heard these things one after another, the noise within the venue clearly subsided. Soon it was completely erased. Then the silent and dense atmosphere continued to persist. At this moment, many people felt a sense of déjà vu before their eyes. A similar feeling was only completely broken when Luo Nan spoke once more. Luo Nan didn't exchange pleasantries. He didn't wait for Abner, the nominal host, to signal. He directly spoke. "I feel that I need to say a few words. The distortion must be dealt with, and the radiation source must be investigated. We are unable to push it away, but we must study it, adapt to it, and even use it to complete our cultivation. We must allow this new era to continue. This is how it should be." But the crux of the problem right now is something that everyone seems to have overlooked. The radiation that stirred up the Abyss region and induced the supernatural power does indeed have a certain correlation with the current situation of the distortion going out of control. But are they really related? Is it like what Lord Secret Deed said? Is it a true cause that brings about a double result? Or is it a coincidence that it happened at the same time? Or is it someone's deliberate design to confuse the public? Can you guys deny this possibility? Luo Nan looked around the venue. He was unconsciously like Lord Secret Deed. He made eye contact with all the participants. He didn't have the time to discern the details in everyone's eyes. He just needed to let these people understand his meaning. At the same time, he deliberately enunciated his words. "Let me put it more clearly. Are the Abyss region and the distortion really related? Are the changes in their trends really caused by the same cause? I think not." Chapter 1102. Luo Nan withdrew his gaze the moment he expressed his negative attitude. He turned to look at his fingers, which were still flexing and extending. It was as if he was gesturing with something, but it was also as if he was grasping something out of thin air. It made people feel as if his words had become a complimentary gift at this stage. The entire audience remained silent under this careless attitude. Only Luo Nan's voice reverberated back and forth. "I know that there have always been discussions about where extraordinary powers come from these past few years. Today, I just found out that someone gave the external environment and key conditions that led to this phenomenon the name of the X factor. I talked about this topic a few hours ago. I don't want to repeat it now, so I'll directly reveal my attitude right now. The sudden appearance of human extraordinary powers really doesn't seem like a natural phenomenon. It doesn't seem like the stimulation of some inner potential. Humans are weak existences. Creatures with low perception occupy too narrow a range on the spectrum of life in the universe. It's not that easy to realize rapid self-evolution and renewal. Speaking of this process, there exists a key external X factor. Whether it's the source of radiation or some other reason, I'm not the least bit surprised. I can completely accept it. But just this extraordinary power, alone, or perhaps rapid self-evolution in itself, its achievements are highly orderly. It is orderly to the point that it conforms to the requirements of human self-consciousness interference. You must know that before the era of distortion, the frontline theoretical research results of the objective world had clearly produced a larger and larger crack with human intuition and experience. It doesn't make sense that the world would suddenly become a slave to human consciousness after a few years. The reason why this is so is that I'm willing to believe that a certain existence used a black box designed to bridge the crack between the mental world and the real world. It built the coupling conditions between the mental and the material, allowing self-cultivation to conform to the instinctive tendencies of humans. At the very least, it was to the point of changing the course of human civilization. At least half of the reason why Luonan was careless was because he needed to organize his words. Even so, he still used a few self-made words and borrowed words that were in line with his own habits. If he were to use them in a published thesis, they would certainly not be rigorous. But everyone present here stood at the peak of the evolution of life on Earth. Even though there were differences in intelligence, their intuition, which was rooted in talent and cultivation experience, was at the peak. They were able to form a high degree of agreement with Luonan. They could understand Luonan's meaning. Luonan's words of just finding out weren't worth mentioning to them, but many people were quite interested in the idea of the so-called black box design. It was not that the theory was novel, but for the idea to be implemented, the support of the power behind the design would rise to a level far beyond the current extraordinary power structure. It was not like a research discussion, but a brainstorming or a description of a ridiculous dream. But why couldn't he help but move closer to that side? Among the extraordinaries in the conference hall and some of the spectators, a portion of them had a relatively clear understanding of their own state of mind as well as the basis for their changes. There were also some who were confused purely on the basis of their senses. Everyone had different thoughts. There were subtle differences in the gazes they cast at Luonan. Luonan was vaguely aware of this. He raised his head again, but at this moment, many people subconsciously avoided his gaze. He should be a god then. At this moment, Blood Demon sighed, but his voice rose in pitch. Even in the virtual venue, his eyes were shining. Luonan turned his head to look and laughed. God? Perhaps. Speaking of which, Luonan had been in the relay station for a short 70 hours. The fragmented information he obtained was not enough to support the entire black box design system. Even though he knew the name of this black box in the Heavenly Yuan Empire, it was known as the Heavenly Abyss Spirit Network. There was one more point that he was extremely clear on. It doesn't matter if it's a god or a miracle. This design itself is brilliant. Even if we only see bits and pieces of it before our eyes, we can still capture traces of rigorous clues. Rigorous? Clues? Take it out and let me see. There were people who were interested and there were people who silently cursed. There were quite a few people in the conference hall who curled their lips, but in the end no one spoke. Aside from fear, there was also the fact that Luonan was drawing something in the air right after. The virtual venue possessed a corresponding demonstration mechanism. Everyone had long since understood Luonan's habit of drawing at the slightest disagreement. There were quite a few people in the conference hall who had studied all of Luonan's public lectures with great concentration. From the cage and configuration theory to the segmentation technique and superconfiguration theory of the past few days. Not a single lesson was missed. At this moment, many people believed that Luonan was preparing to do similar work once more. He wanted to provide evidence and theoretical support for his presentation. Everyone's eyes lit up. Some people even unconsciously changed their sitting postures. However, they didn't. Luonan didn't even explain what the lines he had drawn meant. He just jumped straight to the topic. What about distortion? From what I can see, it's nothing more than a large number of inferior fragments pieced together to form a pot of boiling soup or some petri dish. Perhaps they wish to create a special environment, allowing these fragments, which may indeed be of extraordinary origin, to use this most irresponsible method to find a host. They will rapidly multiply and react with each other, giving birth to new special components and the like. Or perhaps they want to take a look at the future of society as a result of such reckless actions. Luonan's words were even worse in terms of logic. He was completely unrestrained, speaking whatever came to his mind. The main reason was that the coordinate system he referred to was a bit complex and chaotic. He turned his head to the other side as he spoke. His gaze bypassed Overlord Michison and Apollon to point at the Black Lion a bit further away. The latter locked gazes with Luonan and subconsciously thought of a certain object. It was something he had obtained from Li Wei and had just been snatched away by Luonan. This wasn't the main point. What was Luonan looking at him for? Did Luonan want him to take the lead? In this sort of situation? Don't joke around. Black Lion avoided Luo Nan's gaze by reflex and used a smile to hide the emotions in his heart. But no matter what, he couldn't help feeling tangled in his heart. The degree of entanglement grew deeper and deeper. While Black Lion was tormenting himself with all his might, the direction of Luo Nan's words took a small turn. Perhaps only Black Lion and a few others who were observant were able to hear it. Perhaps some people would say that the distortion has manifested a certain degree of controllability. The human experiments that were previously unable to be performed due to certain reasons speak of progress in this area. I won't deny it. The experiments haven't been carried out, but I've been in contact with the relevant experimental products. They do indeed manifest a certain degree of regularity and controllability. But from what I can see, this is more like the filtering of the special rules of the environment, forming an orderly adjustment. In other words, the distorted element is also borrowing the current environment, borrowing the unknown X factor to obtain order from the chaos. It has extended a winding path, and for the time being, there is no end in sight. Isn't this great? Someone blurted out in the venue. Luo Nan looked over, and Black Lion was the same as him. He instinctively averted his gaze, but it still seemed like déjà vu. Yes, it was that Sir General whose position had always been erratic. His name seemed to be corny, and he had even participated in the identification conference last time. Luo Nan also smiled at him, purely acting as a supporting actor this time. Yes, it looks like there is a path, but I can't think that this can be allowed. This is because this is very likely to give a possible light. Yes, strictly speaking, it is a possible future with regularity and order. It is a seed of chaos. To put it simply, it is superfluous. Luo Nan's attention seemed to have returned to the venue during this time, but it didn't stop him from narrating and drawing. The space in front of him had long since been filled with countless lines and diagrams. Due to the full effect of light and shadow, it was nearly impossible to see his face clearly from the other side. Finally, someone couldn't help but ask on behalf of others, "Professor Luo, what do you mean by drawing these?" The one who spoke was the Order of Justice's first ablatum. This female expert, whose real name Luo Nan still didn't know, appeared to be a woman with an extremely gentle temperament. She really couldn't be associated with being powerful. If Luo Nan hadn't personally experienced the level of strength that had clashed with the divine will of Her Majesty Empress Wu from tens of thousands of kilometers away, he might have believed it. Of course, this didn't affect his answer. "Your Excellency, first ablatum, it's like this. I'm trying to use configuration to restore the effects of the distortion on the human body. I'm trying to place it into the system constructed by superconfiguration to see if I can establish a predictive model. What do you think?" The first ablatum of justice carried a sense of curiosity. He cast a gaze that was similar to pure art. It was as if he didn't have any other considerations. "You overestimate yourself." Luo Nan shrugged. "What I'm saying is that my research on both sides is too shallow, especially the distortion. Yes, so much of what I've said is just speculation. It's all intuition. I'm already very grateful that everyone is willing to listen to me. It would be for the best if you could use it as a reference. So it's like this." The first ablatum looked pensive. The others cursed silently. Since it's just a blind guess, where did that sort of attitude come from? Luo Nan was calm. It was true that he hadn't done the relevant research, but in his life experience, there were more advanced examples that were clearly displayed in front of him. Yes, it was his experience at the relay station. From Luo Nan's perspective, the current situation on Earth was like a low-level reflection of the Heaven Abyss civilization, which was confined to the Hongguang star system. The Heaven Abyss civilization and the nefarious poison environment were engaged in a long and difficult struggle. It was like a low-level exercise or experiment. From Luo Nan's understanding, the destructive power of the nefarious poison environment was terrifying and incomparable. It was countless times more serious than the problem of the distortion on Earth. The survivors of the Heaven Abyss Empire were actually able to persevere under such a vile environment. They were able to endlessly improve and revise their own cultivation methods. From this perspective, the rampant distortion wasn't necessarily a hopeless situation. But the problem was that the existence of the nefarious poison environment had already warped the pace and space for the survivors of the Heaven Abyss Empire to progress. It was only the powerful accumulation of civilization from the Heaven Abyss Empire that helped them forcefully carve out a new path on the precipice. And the more and more frequent reforms and foundational techniques had reached the era of the relay station. It was unknown where the future would lead. Luo Nan could clearly feel the stubbornness and bewilderment from the bodies of Liang Lu and the others. If a similar scene were to be placed on Earth's civilization, even if the intensity was reduced by 1,000 times, it was still possible for one to fall to the ground and shatter into pieces. Luo Nan had considered this sort of situation when they were chatting on the pool deck, but he had no way of saying it. It was the same now. Luo Nan had yet to speak of a truly convincing reason up until now. He couldn't speak of the Heaven Abyss Empire and the like. There was still some real evidence such as the reactor. It was best not to beat the grass and startle the snake before sufficient investigation and evidence was obtained. No matter how one looked at it, Luo Nan's statement was a bit empty. But it didn't matter. His attitude itself was the reason. The venue maintained a relative silence. Clearly, everyone was pondering, weighing, and perhaps they were even engaging in private conversations unknown to Luo Nan. This could be considered a good sign. In the end, it was Luo Nan who spoke once more. I know that a practical plan is needed to deal with this problem, but I really don't have any good ideas right now. Researchers don't have first-hand data. No amount of statements is meaningful. Speaking of which, do you have an exact number for the number of infected mutants? Blood Demon was a bit absent-minded after sighing to the gods. Only when Luo Nan's gaze landed on his face did he come to a realization. He grinned. If we could investigate this clearly, then it wouldn't be called losing control. These words weren't too accurate, but everyone understood the meaning. Blood Demon continued, the current problem lies in the fact that mutant infections have a typical pyramid structure. There are large amounts of phase 2 infected at the bottom. There is basically no possibility of reversal, but it is very difficult to distinguish with current detection methods. The 10% in Ha City are phase 3 infected who have already shown signs of mutation. There are a few discrepancies, but it won't be too much. Extrapolating from this data, there are at least 30% of the latent phase 2 infected, maybe even more. Isn't that right, little ya? Apollon's blood-red eyes glanced over, but he didn't respond again. Blood Demon spread his hands. According to the data from the last census, Ha City's population is 190 million. 30%. Just thinking about it makes my scalp go numb. Ha City has basically fallen. That's right, She City is the same. As for Black Africa, hee. Luo Nan asked, can you do it a bit more meticulously? How meticulous? A census of the entire population? Find out the bottom line? Create a file and establish a card? It's too difficult. The most troublesome part about the phase 2 infected lies in the fact that there isn't a clear indicator. It must be a comprehensive result from multidimensional laboratory testing. Even if we gather the power of the entire world and assist Ha City regardless of the cost, it will still take 1 to 2 years to complete the testing with a base of 100 million. But what about She City? What about Black Africa? What about the other cities? Plus, the mutant infections are dynamic. The degree and stages are constantly changing. I'll be responsible for finding out the bottom line. Luo Nan interrupted. Blood Demon was stunned. Responsible for what? Luo Nan flexed and extended his finger once more, causing the extremely simple and crude model before him to make a few rounds of zooming and enlarging. At the same time, he clearly stated, do a general survey, establish a file, and clarify the scope and degree of the aberration infection. Let me do it. After all, no one knows how to detect secondary infections better than me. Chapter 1103. Luo Nan's attitude was far too understated. Even though he had already said it twice, the participants still needed to spend some time to digest it. The core of the problem was undoubtedly the discovery of stage 2 infected. This point had already been explained very clearly, but Luo Nan's attitude seemed to be casually stepping over it. Whether it was the common sense of the participants or the cruel reality described by Apollon, Master Bat, and Blood Demon. Based on what? Some people had already begun to flip through the information. Then they discovered that Luo Nan wasn't just talking big. It was on New Year's Eve last year. At that delicate point in time, Xia City did indeed have a relatively serious case of mutated infection. It seemed to be a series of events. In the 2 months before and after that point in time, Xia City investigated a batch of cases. Oh, using a batch wasn't quite appropriate. Looking at the information, there were over 10,000 suspected mutant infections. The vast majority of them were stage 2. Due to various reasons, this matter was handled in a low-key manner. It basically didn't go out of the circle, so many extraordinaries who were used to coming and going high and low only just noticed this matter. Of course, there were a few people who tried to communicate with Luo Nan a step further. Vice President Marlin of headquarters opened his mouth to ask, "Professor Luo, your train of thought is?" Marlin's question was quite tactful, but Luo Nan didn't have a tacit understanding with him. His understanding was a bit off. "Even though I haven't finished my high school courses, I know that there are many unsolved problems. It's not that it's complicated, it's just that I haven't collected enough samples. Therefore, a census of the entire population is certainly an effective way to solve this problem." I'm talking about the scope. Is there any other explanation for a census of the entire population? Luo Nan spoke as if it were a matter of course. Of course, it's currently limited to the Earth region. If the scope of the census were to be expanded to the forward operating base in Jupiter's orbit, I can't just sit there on an airship, right? Marlin choked. He finally experienced the legendary feeling of dislocation when interacting with Luo Nan that made one vomit blood. Next to him, Overlord Secret Contract, who had slowly retreated back to watch the show, finally cast his gaze at Luo Nan. A census of the entire population is a large project. Luo Nan just blinked. He didn't speak, allowing this old man to return to the front of the stage. Especially this kind of highly complex detection project. In the absence of direct detection methods, theoretically, it has already exceeded the scope of the census. Is that so? Actually, I only have a smattering of knowledge regarding this concept. Luo Nan acted like a well-behaved student, causing quite a few people to roll their eyes. The great lord of secret deeds' smile bloomed behind his white beard. In fact, I have also considered a similar method. I even asked someone to estimate the cost of conducting a national census. The result was not very optimistic. Even if we deduct the most important cost of manpower and conduct sampling investigations in certain epidemic areas that are almost unsalvageable to minimize the investment, we will still need at least 250 billion in hardware investment in order to achieve a relatively ideal result. Great Lord Secret Deed said a number that most people had no idea about. The extraordinaries in the venue weren't in the majority, but there were still many who raised their eyebrows and curled their lips. We need to first build a number of production lines that can supply the corresponding equipment and consumables, and then connect the relevant products into a testing laboratory. This will improve the current worldwide testing capabilities by thousands of times. Even if that's the case, we'll have to wait until the next century at the very least. The next century isn't too far away, but what's certain is that the rate at which the mutated infection spreads will definitely far exceed this theoretical detection ability. High Lord Secret Contract stared at Luo Nan. The effects are all from comparison. There's no harm in asking here. How much budget does Professor Luo need? And more importantly, the speed of the testing. How long will it take for the results to come out? This will directly determine the feasibility of the plan. It definitely won't take until the next century. Perhaps by the end of the year. Oh. Many people in the venue let out gasps of surprise. There was pure astonishment and there was doubt. But thinking about Luo Nan's previous performance, it seemed to be within a reasonable range? What in the world is this method? Old Man Ghost Eye, an old acquaintance of Luo Nan's, was a veteran psychic adversary. He was once Luo Nan's sparring partner. He was a bit unable to restrain his curiosity and shouted from the back. Luo Nan didn't explain in detail. He really didn't have a plan right now. After all, the Soul Cloak, which used water molecules as the basis for interference, had already been possessed by the magneto-optical mica. Enormous changes had occurred in form and content. It would take some time for him to get used to it. Luo Nan changed his angle a bit. I really haven't thought about the budget. I don't have that concept. However, I definitely won't need the scene you're talking about, High Lord. Brother, you must consider expenses when you do things. Blood Demon chattered from the other side. Doing projects is burning money. You need startup funds at the very least, right? You need to fight for funds and sponsorships. Of course, it's great to help others earn money, but it's not easy to get money back. If you have a reliable plan, I can sponsor you first. It's too troublesome. Luo Nan wasn't being polite. He really felt that it was troublesome. He didn't think that a global mental sensor network needed any expenses. If it did, it would have already been paid for by his grandfather and parents over the past few decades. He was just a user and a verifier. He had to do this work well. Plus, didn't he just earn a sum? The auction should still be in progress. It seems that those two cards are quite popular. Mr. Blood Demon, your creativity is quite good. Speaking of which, even if I give you a portion of the design fee, that sum of money should be enough. Luo Nan began to count on his fingers one by one. If I really want to calculate, I can use this sum of money to rent some supercomputing resources and find a few data analysts. Then I can start working. If the SCA supports a few more people and opens up the database, it might be even more ideal. It's just that the process won't be easy to follow. Should I establish a fund or something? This time it was Blood Demon who choked. Perhaps there were many people present. Blood Demon squeezed out a sentence with great difficulty. You're showing off your style. Blood Demon's sigh was a bit sarcastic in this sort of atmosphere. As for whether it was Luonan or someone else who was being stabbed, it depended on the person. Don't tell me I don't want to solve the problem? Since no one can do it better than me, of course I'll take the lead. Luonan spoke in a manner that seemed to be expected. Coupled with Lord's secret deed and Blood Demon's intentional or unintentional support, there was no room for others to display their abilities. It was as if this matter, which concerned the fate of Ha City, Tin City, and even the entire Earth, had been decided. Alarm bells rang in the hearts of many people. Even though the subsequent course of events was unclear, they instinctively felt that the situation wasn't too good. People exchanged glances in the venue, and they quickly communicated with one another below the stage. It wasn't just limited to the participants. There were also all sorts of monsters and demons paying attention to the progress of the conference. The Black Lion's soul was summoned by Old Els. This is absolutely not good news for you. Aha! Before tonight, Luonan practically had no influence at all in the field of mutant. But if he is allowed to do this, he won't need to wait for the time limit he set. As long as he has 1 or 2 publicly recognized results, he will be one of the top authorities. What will he do then? Old El's voice was like a cold wind that lingered in the Black Lion's ears. Don't tell me he wants your kingdom of chaos to exist forever on the African continent? For what reason? Just because you and him call each other brothers today and have a joyous gathering? See, his intentions are already extremely clear. You're really lobbying without any regard for your capital, old man. The problem is, how are you going to stop him? Are you going to face an extraordinary researcher who doesn't need any funding? The Black Lion's mouth cracked open and he laughed to himself. He didn't care even though he seemed rather abrupt in the venue. He just continued to communicate below the stage. My suggestion. It's best if you shut your mouth. The Black Lion's attitude was incomparably sincere. Right now you should and you must take into account the situation of researcher Luo slamming on the brakes. With him around, the progress of your aberration gene collection and the difficulty of the Bloodline project might not be able to outrun the speed at which your vitality is consumed. For a businessman like you, if you make a losing deal with the same person twice in a row, it's probably the legendary road to death. Old Els did not continue speaking, but he might not have listened to the Black Lion's advice. This was because at this moment, a new change was transmitted. The news of the uncontrollable aberration infection in Ha City and Tin City had already spread. Whether it was Apollon or Master Bat, they were only at the venue to make a report and fulfill their obligation to inform others. They would not change anything because of the attitude of the participants. Outside the virtual venue, the real situation continued to advance. This news had already spread rapidly in the form of headlines. In a short period of time, it bombarded almost all the information channels in the world and poured into the brains of billions of people. Just like what was shown at the summit conference, different people would have different considerations for the same matter. Regarding this headline, the major media outlets around the world also adopted different reporting perspectives. At present, the hottest news image was specially forwarded by the conference host, Abner. It came from Ha City. It was probably in a landmark area of the city. Dense crowds gathered on the streets and squares, listening to the announcement from the city manager. When the seemingly rigid gentleman announced in a serious tone the news of giving up on detection and active disposal, hundreds of thousands of citizens screamed crazily, cheers. The camera swayed in such an atmosphere. When it chose to use a close-up view to experience the current atmosphere, there was already a young man who was so excited that his face was distorted. He took the initiative to rush to the front and roared out a slogan. Glory to the aberrations, the world belongs to us. The crowd behind him was also shouting and roaring. Their words were even simpler, more direct and more violent. Power, power, power. Such a sound and scene fell into the ears and eyes of the participants of the summit conference, but it was so meaningful. Chapter 1104. June. T-City officially entered winter. The northwest monsoon brought with it a humid and cold airflow. When the cold wind hit one's face, It seemed to carry the earthy smell of the old continent's highlands. So much so that it became one of the main themes of tonight's banquet. Kawahara Michiko came to this conclusion when she wandered around the banquet hall of the castle. Of course, this was just an illusion. Separated by tens of thousands of kilometers, the northern and southern hemispheres were reversed. Even if the elements of nature had a subtle flow and exchange, it was impossible for these ordinary people to sense it. It was actually just a group of brothers in distress bragging with lingering fear and excitement after narrowly escaping death. Even though nearly a month had passed, strictly speaking it was 3 weeks. The timing was just right. Time had quietly beautified the memories of the people who had experienced it, washing away their embarrassment and fear. With a relatively peaceful ending, the legendary nature of the process had provided them with a lot of things to talk about, so they did not reject it, and were even willing to discuss the seemingly vivid personal experience. They even gave each other the friend in distress stickers and medals. So many of the repulsive faces looked cute at this time. Yes, perhaps a considerable portion of them were just pretending for her to see. After all, the true theme of this banquet was the official establishment of the Luo Nan and his Friends Foundation, the banquet held for the foundation's benefactors. The most dazzling figures at the banquet were not the largest individual benefactors, the honorary chairman of the foundation, or the well-known wealthy people of T-City. I was Mr. Langley. It was also not the sole director of Quantum Corporation, Mr. Mao Jingye. It was definitely not the so-called social celebrities of T-City. The only ones who could truly be called stars were the major shareholder of the Castle Financial Group, the representative of the chairman, Mrs. Halder, Ms. Yin Lu, and Kawahara Michiko herself. The Castle Financial Group was considered to be of medium scale in the business world. It might not even rank in the top 5 in T-City, let alone the entire world. But this kind of ranking was meaningless. Mrs. Halder could still say she didn't come at the banquet where the world's rich and powerful gathered. She could only send a representative to make up the numbers, and she was still the core of the entire banquet. All of this could only be because Mrs. Halder was Mr. Luo Nan's trusted aide, and Ms. Yin Lu was the person in charge of the foundation arranged by Luo Nan himself. It was the same for Michiko Kawahara. She sat on the sofa and slightly relaxed her long tense toes and ankles. Mom is at a banquet. It's fine. Tell Mom. Did you have fun today? Kawahara Jia laughed. It's the same here, Mom. Today is the birthday of Mr. Luo Yuandao, Mr. Luo Nan's grandfather. He's 80 years old. His whole family is here. Kawahara Michiko subconsciously straightened her body. Mr. Luo Yuandao? Of course she knew about the old man who had a serious mental illness. With his physical condition, it would be difficult for him to hold such a grand celebration even if he was 80 years old. Besides, she had not heard any rumors. In other words, this was most likely just a family banquet. Kawahara Michiko's heart thumped. You're here. Did Mr. Luo Nan invite you? It's not like that, Mom. Today is Sunday. Weiwu and I are going to Gym Master Shio's place to do homework. We just happened to run into each other. So that's how it is. Kawahara Michiko's mood rose and fell. A thin layer of sweat actually appeared on her body. She then thought about the time difference between D-City and Xia City. It was already 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Xia City. Banquets generally did not last until this time. Clearly, Jia just happened to run into each other. This was not bad. Just as she was thinking, Kawahara Jia lowered his voice. Mom, I know a secret. Kawahara Michiko furrowed her brows. She did not respond, but Jia said, I just heard that today is Mr. Luo Nan's birthday. But he doesn't seem to know. Is that so? Kawahara Michiko's mind immediately popped up with public information related to Luo Nan. She remembered that this person's birthday should be on the 16th of June. There was still a week to go. She quickly searched the perpetual calendar. Yes, Luo Nan's birth date was the 16th of June 1980. Using the traditional calendar of East Asia, it was the 29th day of the 4th lunar month. This year, it just so happened to be the 9th of June on the Gregorian calendar. This matched up. Kawahara Michiko considered another problem after solving this little doubt. Her tone became a lot more serious. Jia, thank you for telling Mom these things. But I don't want you to do it again. Ha! Do you remember what Mom said to you? From the moment you came to Xia City, you should respect Mr. Luo Nan like you respect Mom. You should learn from him. You should ask him for advice. You should be a qualified retainer. You should be loyal to Mr. Luo Nan and obtain his approval. Without Mr. Luo Nan's permission, you can't reveal his secrets and other information to anyone including Mom. even if it's just a small matter. The other side went silent. Kawahara Machiko was actually a bit worried. She hadn't criticized her own son like this for a long time, especially now that they were separated by tens of thousands of miles. She didn't even have a video call. She felt very uncertain for a time. Just as she was about to send a video call request, Jia Heyuan asked in an even softer voice, "Mom, are you Mr. Luonan's mistress?" Kawahara Machiko had once believed that she would never be troubled by such a question. To a certain extent, she even hoped that everyone else would think this way. She wanted to turn this matter into reality. Only then would she be able to consolidate her inexplicable position. But at this very moment, when this question came out of her own son's mouth, her feelings were clearly not as simple as she imagined. She even subconsciously wanted to slap him, but Jia Heyuan wasn't in front of her. That empty slap seemed to hit her face in the end. "Jia, why do you say this?" Kawahara Machiko only realized that her voice was dull and hoarse when she spoke. It was like cracking porcelain. When it was struck again, it no longer had a clear echo. "Is it in Xia City?" "No. It's in Banqing, Mom." Jia Heyuan's voice was still weak, but it was strangely steady and even calm. "Many people have tried to tell me this matter, including Grandpa and Grandma. They've tried various methods and angles. It seems that I really am your weakness, Mom." Jia. Even though she knew that her son was far more mature than his peers, Kawahara Machiko didn't want to hear the result of his deliberations. She didn't want to hear it at all. A second or two later, or perhaps even longer, Jia Heyuan spoke. His voice was a bit urgent. "Weiwu is calling me. Mom, don't worry. Mr. Luonan is a very, very good person. Many people here are." The next moment, Jia Heyuan used a very clear voice to respond. "Hey, I'm here. Wait for me." The call ended immediately. Kawahara Machiko stared blankly at the bracelet on her wrist for a long time. She almost thought that she would shed tears, even if they were just a few symbolic drops. But when she heard the sound of people outside the lounge, she reflexively straightened her back. The corners of her mouth curled up, revealing a beautiful, calm and mysterious arc. It was as if everything was under her control. In fact, she really did achieve perfect control. Whether it was her external expression or her internal state of mind. Even if there were some ups and downs, they all settled down in a sentence that was like an incantation. This was what Jia had said. "Mr. Luonan is a very, very good person. Right? A 6-year-old child could tell in 2 weeks. Mr. Luonan is a very, very good person." The door to the lounge opened, and the noise from the banquet hall began to flow once more. Kawahara Machiko was like a mermaid. After a temporary rest, she immersed herself wholeheartedly into the turbulent flow of complicated interpersonal relationships. She was never tired of it. Chapter 1105. Hyuanji ended the call with his mother in a hurry and ran in the direction Di Weiwu was calling him. How complicated could the layout of a sanatorium be? The relatively private places for calls were at the end of the corridor, the stairwell, the elevator, and so on. Because of this, Hyuanji bumped into someone when he ran out from the corner of the stairwell. That person was also on the phone. "Yes, it's over there. Just send me the coordinates." Hyuanji was a bit confused when he heard this voice. Wasn't this the main character of his conversation with his mother, Mr. Luonan? Clearly, Mr. Luonan had taken a fancy to this private place for calls. Maybe he saw that Hyuanji was the first to go in, so he called from outside. Hyuanji didn't know whether to run or stay. While he was in a daze, Luonan reached out and rubbed Hyuanji's head, indicating that he should go and play with Di Weiwu. It should be to do homework. Hyuanji was hypnotized. He walked over in a daze and faintly heard Luonan say, "It's not convenient to ask right now. They're trying their best to make me forget about this. I don't want to use it to disgust people. I'll just go pay my respects next week." Even though Hyuanji was much more mature than his peers, it was hard for him to determine what Luonan was talking about without enough information. Right now, almost everyone in the corridor on this floor of the sanatorium was related to Mr. Luonan. Hyuanji had only walked a few steps when the fat Mr. Mo Peng touched his head. He even said that he needed an excuse to be immortal. Sure enough, the customs of Ban City were very different from those of Xia City. He had to adapt to them one by one. "Don't bully me." Mr. Luonan's call was very short. He followed closely behind Hyuanji. Hyuanji hurriedly turned around and bowed seriously. He was apologizing for his actions, which he didn't know if he had exposed himself earlier. Mo Ping didn't pay attention to him at all. Instead, he clenched his fist in a very serious manner. It was the hand that had touched Yuanji's head. Mo Peng swung it twice and tapped in the air. He must be following some kind of visual logic that they couldn't see. A second later, Mo Peng swung his arm and shouted with a suppressed voice, "Double kill." Luo Nan reached his hand out to touch Yuanji's forehead as he was shouting. Luo Nan slapped his hand away. "What are you doing? Those who see it, have a share." Mo Peng was grinning from ear to ear. "Thanks to this little bro, I'll have 2 slots to experience the 10 Days in the Wilderness expansion pack. Don't miss it if you go the wrong way. This experience card is for you. And shouldn't it be given to Jie?" Mo Peng blurted out, "What games are kids playing? 10 Days in the Wilderness is a special tutorial. Children under 13 can't touch it." At this time, Yuanji decided to play the role of a childish person of the same age. How could he not see Mr. Luo Nan acting as if he could not see through his cousin's clumsy acting skills? But then again, this should be a birthday present, right? Half a second later, Luo Nan responded with the same subpar acting skills and lines. "Fine. I accept the sincerity of a brother and the good fortune of Jie." Yuanji revealed an innocent smile at the right time. Mo Peng also laughed happily. He was truly happy. "I'll send it to you. Remember this favor later. Take me flying." Luo Nan, who had left behind a glorious battle record at Frost River Reality, took charge of this matter. "No problem. Let's go to the hero seat. I'll remember." After Luo Nan's performance was rewarded, Luo Nan patted Mo Peng on the shoulder and walked toward his grandfather's room. Mo Peng was already making up for his slip of the tongue later. "Jie, there's nothing good about that adult-oriented game. Brother, Yuanji corrected him very seriously. "You're my elder, Mr. Mo Peng. Hey Jie, you've been slacking off for far too long." Di Weiwu gave Yuanji a senior command. Luo Nan checked the new electronic experience card in his hand and pretended not to see it. The purchase date for the experience card was yesterday. He laughed again and flipped his hand inside the sleeve of his t-shirt. When it came out again, there was an old notebook in his hand. He arrived outside his grandfather's room, but he did not immediately push the door open. He just looked at the situation inside the room through the glass window. Inside the room, his aunt and Emoya were chatting with his grandfather's special nurse, Auntie Hong. They were understanding the situation. Ruiwen stood quietly to the side. Yes, she was with Di Weiwu just now. When did she come in? His uncle Mo Haihang was lying on the other side of the chair. He had already fallen asleep with his eyes closed. As for his grandfather, who had given birth early today, he was on the balcony of the outer room, chatting with Gym Master Xiu. Below his feet was the new building block Kingdom of God. Of course, this did not stop him from dozing off under the warm afternoon sunlight. Luo Nan looked down at the old notebook in his hand when he saw this scene. He shook his head and tucked this thing under his ribs. Then he turned around and left. He passed through the corridor and arrived at the balcony attached to this floor. The balcony was also facing the sun. His vision was a bit better from this position. He could even see his grandfather's calf nearly buried in the building blocks on the balcony of the ward. You can say that this is a hidden security hazard. I once considered giving the old gentleman a different room, but considering the problem of adaptability, I didn't bother with it. Someone spoke from behind Luo Nan. Luo Nan turned around and greeted with a smile, "Brother Octopus." The person who came was none other than Zhang Yuliang, who worked in this sanatorium. Well, Luo Nan was more used to calling him Octopus. This neuropharmaceutics expert wore white clothes. His hands were in his pockets as he walked over unhurriedly. He stood side by side with Luo Nan and followed Luo Nan's gaze to look in that direction. "You didn't go in just now." "Not just that. I hid half a foot in the crowd at the beginning. It's a birthday celebration. Just don't mess things up." Octopus opened his mouth, but he swallowed back the words, "You're also the birthday boy today." Since Mrs. Luo Shuqing and the others racked their brains to use this special day to organize a family activity, and they deliberately hid it from Luo Nan, the person involved, in order to avoid making bad associations, why should he expose them? Well, Luo Nan didn't need him to be smart. Does the old man get excited when he sees you? Basically. Is it because he can see how terrifying of a fellow you are? Octopus was obviously joking. But Luo Nan nodded. "It should be like this." Luo Nan didn't answer immediately. He just asked, "Has Grandpa's state been the same these past few days?" "Yeah. He's good for a while and bad for a while. He looks up to the sky at every turn, especially on cloudy days. Luckily, Xia City has been bathed in sunlight these past few days. Luo Nan shot a glance at the sky and agreed, that's right. He's been okay. Octopus felt that these words lacked sincerity. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. Nanster, I need to ask you something in private. You're being too polite. Octopus lowered his voice. I can't not be polite. The situation is very sensitive right now. We're the ones who deal with abnormalities. Aren't we? At the summit conference, you strongly advocated to separate abnormalities from the X factor that triggers extraordinary powers. This is drawing a line. Octopus had already taken his hands out of his pockets. He spread them out in the shape of a scale. Should we deal with the abnormalities first or should we explore the planes first? The internet is going to be in an uproar right now. But you don't need to worry. Our medical world will definitely stand on your side. I even have to thank you. Luo Nan rolled his eyes. At the same time, he understood what Octopus wanted to ask. You want to talk about the problem of the source of radiation. To be precise, I want to talk about the influence of the current objective environment on everyone's cultivation. Is there really such a close external factor? Octopus had a face of curiosity. From what I can see, the trend line of Lord's secret contract is a false proposition. However, the trend of environmental change cannot be denied. Luo Nan paused and changed the topic. I went to see old Yu yesterday. His body is getting worse and worse. My grandpa is actually the same. I'm thinking that they actually have something in common. Octopus blinked. Old Yu is a psychic. There's no need to talk about his mental sensing ability. And I feel that my grandpa's perception is also very sharp. Or perhaps I should say that he has specialization on a certain special level. He can receive information outside the perception dimension of ordinary people. That's what I'm thinking right now. Luo Nan's train of thought was expanded from the special sensing machinery of the magnetic photon mica jellyfish. Every day he would be scoured by an enormous amount of information that exceeded his ability to comprehend. He was deeply aware of the suffering involved. Luo Nan's words were not hard to understand purely in terms of verbal logic. Octopus made even more connections from this. So, the old man's physical state, including old Yu's current state, is indeed related to the source of radiation? We can't exclude this aspect of the factor. Of course, there's also the problem of insufficient analysis, overload, and downtime. Luo Nan casually flipped through the old notebook next to him. He looked at the chaotic lines that had been destroyed and filled in. This was a special item that had stirred up a storm not too long ago. Many people believed that it possessed an astonishing secret and corresponding value. Luo Nan didn't want to correct anything because he hadn't completely deciphered the information within. But he was certain that he was more qualified than anyone else on Earth to make a judgment. His grandpa certainly didn't possess extraordinary strength. After his mental symptoms appeared, his body was much weaker than a normal person's. It was very likely that such a weak body could bear an extremely dense and extremely fatal amount of information. Luo Nan, who had rich experience with overload, could completely imagine the consequences. The current Luo Yuandao of the past certainly didn't possess the alter spider web that Luo Nan used to filter information. What's more, the pressure of quantity wasn't the ultimate problem. The most fatal problem lay in the layers and the structure. He was able to detect these traces from the records in the notebook. It was like a storage device with limited space. A large amount of highly compressed files had been copied inside. The device was already stuffed to the brim and needed to be decompressed. Machines could crash and restart. How could a person do the same? Chapter 1106. Luo Nan already had a definite answer in his mind as to what the source of radiation was. Behind the fragmented chaos where even the order of space and time no longer existed. An order that ought to have existed. The source that caused this result. According to Luo Nan's current understanding, the objective of manifestation was certainly Sunwheel Prison. Luo Nan had confirmed his objective, but there was still a crucial detail that troubled him. How did Sunwheel Prison form a linked relationship with his grandfather before the current cycle approached? According to the data left behind by his father, the observation data of the Mist Labyrinth began in the year 75 and ended in the year 90. With his grandfather's mental state and the reality of his father walking alone, the old man certainly did not participate in the next 10 years. Then came the problem. Whether it was Luo Yuandao or Luo Zhongheng, they were far from being able to reach the core area of Sunwheel Prison. They were separated by the boundless mist labyrinth. How were they able to draw in such an enormous flood of chaotic data? It seemed like there was no special projection like the Wraith sign at that time. Luonan thought of other factors such as the external neuron, but there were still some things that didn't make sense. No matter what the reason was, Luonan believed that the source of the terrible situation his grandfather faced was certainly the realization of a connection with Sunwheel Prison that traversed the barrier of space and time. Luonan's past experiences were right there. How was it possible for an old man who did not possess any extraordinary power to withstand the impact of the terrifying flood of data? There was also, did the two still maintain a connection? Was his grandfather still suffering from the impact and corrosion? Going a step further, there was the continuous aurora light, the daytime nightmare, and even the magnetic mica jellyfish. What sort of effects would these unexpected factors have on his grandfather? What sort of damage would he receive? Luonan had tried to avoid thinking deeply about this problem, but how could he avoid it? Every time Luonan's thoughts reached this level, he would imitate the Sunwheel Prison in the space of his consciousness. The structure of checks and balances formed by the chains and the Wraith sign would hum and tremble within the chaotic dark cloud of information. And deep within the dark cloud, the hall constructed out of thin air would respond without a sound. Luonan was just trying to find a rule of order that could be explained and analyzed from the structure of the Sunwheel Prison. It would be best if it could be used by his grandfather to relieve his pressure. That was all. But this was not an easy task. Luonan's expression gradually turned gloomy. Octopus felt that there was no way to continue this topic. Coincidentally, a few messages flashed through his friend group. Just by looking at the flashy links, he knew that Bamboo Pole, the rumor maker, had started working again. This guy forwarded at least 30 pieces of trending news and gossip every day. Apart from more than half of them being eye candy and mental food, the other half basically included key local, regional, and even global information. As the saying goes, a homebody who doesn't step out of the crowd knows the affairs of the world. Octopus used this as an excuse to forcefully change the topic. Right now, the radiation source is still a hidden concern. Once Keha City and Shiching City statements came out, the problem of radiation mutation immediately exploded. Look at the statistics that Bamboo Pole posted in the group chat. In 88 cities, there have been a total of 192 demonstrations of more than 10,000 people in the past 24 hours. Moreover, it's an equal distribution of rain and dew. No one can escape. There are those who support and those who protest. It's quite messy. Luonan casually flipped through a few pages of the notebook. He twisted his wrist and sucked the notebook into the void like magic. Then he turned around and leaned against the railing. He sighed. Sparks are flying over here as well. Look at what Bamboo Pole is doing. The internet is boiling over. Luckily, the East Asian cultural circle is relatively conservative. The focus isn't on some group evolution. They're mainly bringing up old scores. This is quite sensitive. There was a large-scale strike in the trade zone of Tianban City a few days ago. Luonan's information channels far surpassed Octopus's. It's probably the aftermath of the Vagrant Act. Yes. Especially the so-called Humanitarian Aid Agreement for the mutated infected. The two policies of restricted household registration and voluntary living have caused many tragedies of family separation. There are also many vagrant tribes that have lost their homes and relocated. The pressure is mainly on the welfare organizations and the SCA. Uncle has been working overtime for nearly a week for this. It wasn't easy for him to use his grandfather's birthday as an excuse. In the end, he still hasn't woken up yet. This topic was a bit too complicated and in-depth. Octopus shook his head. It's precisely because this matter is sharp. It's not that sensitive compared to group evolution. Many people are willing to join in the buzz and express their public stance. Right now, the public opinion on the internet is basically one-sided. Actually, I also support an investigation. But it seems to be a contradiction when it comes to the issue of isolation of mutated people. It's clearly an anti-isolation stance. I'm afraid things will get lively in the future. Octopus's brows furrowed as he spoke. That foundation of yours hasn't officially started operating yet. You must be careful and keep a low profile. Right now, many people are eager for you to take the lead and attract firepower for them. Luonan curled his lips. He nodded without saying a word. Octopus didn't know if Luonan was listening or not. He was just chatting, so the topic jumped a bit. Speaking of which, Bamboo Pole is working for you? Yeah. Brother Bamboo Pole's data analysis ability is exactly what I need. It's even rarer that he knows everything about the inner world. He has his own information channel. If I don't grab hold of him, I'll lose out. Hey, can't you take care of the minds of the people at the bottom of society? Brother Octopus, you can come if you want. The Foundation's design is to conduct investigations and research at the same time. Research on the nervous system is also a very important field. Forget it. I know my own limits. Bamboo Pole's professional skills are ranked in the top 10 of the inner world. It's hard for me to rank in the top 1,000. I'd be too old to be a graduate student. It's better to watch over this stall. Of course, if there are any new developments, please do share them in a timely manner. Luonan didn't try to persuade Octopus any further. In fact, he really hoped that he had a trustworthy and knowledgeable friend like Octopus to watch over this place. And Octopus most likely understood this point. Luonan thought for a bit and said, "Actually, I've been pondering over a paper these past few days. I'm preparing to publish it publicly. Let's ponder it together later." The current topic is formatting theory, mapping example and expanded research on the human body giant system. Isn't it a bit unprofessional? Octopus went, twice, but before he could respond, a call came in from Luonan's side. It was his aunt, Mrs. Luo Shuqing. Luonan heard a few words and immediately displayed his lovable appearance. "Are we going back?" "Okay, we're almost there." "Whose car?" "No one's car isn't going back." If that's the case, then of course I'm going home." "I'm going with you, Auntie." Octopus's eyelids twitched as he watched from the side. All right, this was a young man. He was solid. But the topic they were discussing just now and the various legends from not too long ago, what were they all about? For a time, Octopus had an intense feeling of absurdity and dislocation in his heart. He was practically replacing Luonan with a split personality. Luonan had already hung up the phone while he was distracted. He turned around and ridiculed Octopus. "Emoya wants to take Rue-1 to the recording studio. She says that they might work through the night." And he actually agreed. "But I remember last year when Emoya participated in the music festival, our house practically exploded on the spot. Is there such a big difference between one person playing music and two people playing music? Perhaps Andy just has a problem with underground music?" Hee. Luonan didn't say anything more. Even though he had basically entered the level where he didn't need a means of transportation, he still needed to follow the group in order to preserve his image as a tottering obedient child in front of his family. He waved his hand and walked towards the exit of the platform. "Brother Octopus, let's talk in detail later. Actually, I've pretty much drafted the outline. I'll send it to the group in 2 days." "Oh, okay. I won't go over. I don't want Andy to say those courteous words again." Luonan didn't turn his head. He made an okay gesture and ran with small steps. He soon crossed the platform and disappeared behind the door. He was like a graceful and energetic youth. That was how he should be. Just from the perspective of personal interactions, this wasn't too bad. At the very least, the current Luonan was no longer the somewhat gloomy youth they first met. Just from this point alone, Luonan was already quite good. Octopus didn't have much use for Octopus in a place like the sanatorium, and he was a relatively high-end professional. Most of his time was spent on scientific research. Octopus received a bit of stimulation from their conversation just now, so he went back and soaked himself in his own laboratory. He entered a state of mind and lost track of time. This lasted until the hexaear vibrated. Someone in his friend group had added him. It was Xie Junping. "Octopus bro. I'm holding a temporary board meeting. I've entrusted Brother Papercut to help me pick someone up. Brother Papercut's car was just sent for maintenance. He might be a bit late." Erping got it. Di Weiwu usually lived in Lan Town's welfare home. During the weekends he would go to the sanatorium to do his homework. At the same time he would receive the influence of Gym Master Xiao and Dean Wan. Yuanji was sent over by his mother, and he received the same treatment. Perhaps Luonan considered him a hostage, but Luonan treated him equally and nurtured him as a disciple. There were plenty of benefits, but the transportation wasn't too convenient. Normally, Worker Zhai would come over to pick someone up. If Worker Zhai was working overtime and couldn't get away, then it would be Xie Junping, a loyal believer of the Order of Creators, who would come out. Papercut was a mobile member, a spare tire of spare tires. With Xie Junping's current resources, arranging a driver to pick someone up wasn't a big deal. However, everyone knew that these were extraordinary times. Even though they were at Xia City's headquarters, The people by Luonan's side needed to maintain a minimum level of safety awareness. They needed to communicate and help each other. They didn't want to give the schemers in the shadows any opportunities. At this time, Papercut jumped out. "Octopus, Erping, I won't be late. We've already entered the main entrance. I hitched a ride with Bamboo Pole." Octopus was baffled. "You two are together?" "Bamboo Pole, don't bring bad news to an honest man." Bamboo Pole, hee hee. While they were chatting, Octopus raised his head and looked out of the window. He found that it was already almost 6 o'clock. The weekend was also the peak hour. It would take at least 1.5 hours to get back to Forest Wall District. So he sent another message. "Paper Cutter, Bamboo Pole, you guys can eat here. This is the staff cafeteria. Eat to your heart's content, it's my treat. Hey, if it weren't for the fear that the children would be hungry, do you think I would be willing to entertain you? Forget it. The children in the orphanage go to bed at 9 o'clock. If I stay here for too long, I will inevitably disturb my schedule when I go back. Dean Wan is easy to talk to, but Nanny Wang is not easy to dismiss." After a few minutes, the other side sent another message. "I've got him." Octopus watched the surveillance video that was specially connected to the Hexier. Sure enough, Bamboo Pole was leading the two children. He made a V sign to the camera on the ceiling. Papercut chuckled to the side. Farther away, Xiao Xinyu, who had become increasingly thin in recent times, held his hands behind his back as he watched this. Although there was no smile on his face, he was still relaxed. Octopus rolled his eyes. "All right, I won't be sending you off." He was definitely outstanding among his peers, and people could not help but praise Lady He Yuanji for teaching her son well. Kids nowadays seem to have a bright future ahead of them. Children could be praised face to face, but they couldn't be praised like this. It just so happened that Papercut had nothing better to do, so he took a video of the two kids in the back row. He sent it to the group and used it as a conversation topic. It seems like they have the innate talent of ability users. Over here, the barrier between the mental and the material doesn't seem to be very solid. Birds of a feather flock together. Bamboo Pole drove without batting an eyelid. He also quietly flattered everyone, including himself, for once. Papercut didn't appreciate it. He gave Papercut a push. In reality, concentrate on driving. Many people in the group flattered Xie Junping. It was clear that he had been absent-minded during the board meeting. He was still emotional. "Then what's the deal with me sitting in the middle of a bunch of stupid birds that are about to choke to death?" The market value of sky crystal biology has skyrocketed these past few days. What's there to be dissatisfied about as a marketing director? Bamboo Pole turned a deaf ear to Papercut's warning. For a psychic architect, chatting online while driving wasn't even a distraction. "Thank you, marketing director of a research and development subsidiary. It's all the same. Speaking of which, Director Xie is progressing at lightning speed. Last night, with the collective cooperation of the Ring of Blood and Will, he persisted until the latter half of the journey. He almost killed his way into the first echelon. Crazily earning money while cultivating at the same time, not neglecting either. Amazing. Forget it. In this sort of irrational market, you earn money until you have atrial fibrillation. Any random Tom, Dick, or Harry can say that XX medicine can prevent abnormalities, and the market will immediately be cleared out. Not even dregs will be left. If you say that it can cause. Don't even think about selling 1 gram or 2. Hulausan's ranch hasn't seen blood for almost a week. He might be a living bodhisattva and set them all free. Can you send me 2 heads? Shuele popped his head out. My house hasn't seen any meat or fish for half a month. My mom is adamant that all meat, eggs, and milk products can be contaminated. My dad is guarding the police canteen right now and won't go home. Go straight to him. 2 heads is too stingy. If you can eat 20,000 heads, he'll kneel down on the spot and call you daddy. Xie Junping responded in a bad mood. He had a belly full of complaints that he wanted to spit out. At this time, even if you make a fortune quietly, you should be careful that your son doesn't have anus. These idiots actually want me to increase my marketing efforts. I highly suspect that they want to take advantage of this opportunity to make a fortune and then cash out and leave. The medicine and whatnot is fine. What really made the market value of sky crystal biology skyrocket is probably the plantation building. Didn't your dad invest in building a batch in the 90s? It was only built the year before last, right? Back then, there were people who ridiculed him for taking such a big step and pulling his balls. But right now, the Sky Crystal plantation has already taken up over 20% of Xia City's food supply. In the future, it might even increase by over 10%. And right now, Xia City's dietary structure is changing in a panic. The ratio of meat, eggs, and milk has plummeted, and food has become the majority. There is no currency that is harder than this right now. Of course, this is just a temporary change in a special period of time and a special environment. A windfall smashed in the face and it's gone just like that. Only an idiot wouldn't cash out. Could be said that the world was seriously fragmented. The news of Ha City and Shi City's mutant infection going out of control had a completely different effect on every major city in the world. The conservative cultural circles of East Asia were basically fearful of it like a tiger. But the New World, Old Europe, and other places had already set off wave after wave of revelry. The resulting social problems were also completely different. Bamboo Pole also poured out relevant information links to the group aside from his speech. He started with financial news from 7 or 8 years ago all the way to recent market analysis. He clearly explained the cause and effect of the situation. It also made Xie Junping, who was in the middle of the situation, dumbstruck. So it turns out that my old man is this awesome. He already foresaw today's situation? Yeah. I really want to praise him, but truthfully speaking, Big Boss Xie probably made this decision back then when he saw the birth of the Deep Blue platform. It was accompanied by the progenitor energy source and the increasingly matured miniature fusion reactor technology. He used this project to wantonly hoard related minerals and make technological reserves. Bamboo Pole began to send out relevant information, whether it is the progenitor energy source box of the Deep Blue platform or the ambient temperature superconducting specter or necessary for the miniature fusion reactor. They are all unique products of the Deep Blue world. They are standard strategic resources. It was only in the early 90s that the Deep Blue platform released them for a short period of time, allowing everyone to taste a bit of sweetness. Then Big Boss Xie caught them. From this point of view, it wouldn't be wrong to say that he had foresight. Papercut clicked his tongue twice in the car. If that's the case, then no matter what, Erping's family is going to make a huge profit this time. It painted the gloomy area with a disorderly color. Through the car window, a clamor of noise could be heard. They could hear the roar of old-fashioned engines from far away. Wow. Looking at this direction, it's the convoy from Trigate District. I see Grandpa Sher's big pickup truck. Di Weiwu's eyes were very sharp in the back. He immediately identified the most conspicuous element of the parade ahead. He did his best to poke his head out from the child's seat. He wanted to undo the safety lock, but he was scolded by Papercut. Be obedient and stay here. As they spoke, the low-speed convoy slowly pressed forward. Bamboo Pole pressed down on the car window. The seemingly orderly chants, each louder than the last, pushed through the air and faced them head-on. We want an investigation. We want a name list. Release the source of the information. Break the ASIA. Bamboo Pole looked out the window and watched the parade. He used the Hexier to secretly record and synchronize the video to the group chat. The vagrant residential area of Trigate District is moving. The organization is simple and crude. The chants aren't unified and powerful enough. There's a high chance that it's spontaneous. Should we rejoice? Papercut grunted and suddenly slapped his thigh. Oh, this is directed at the SCA and social welfare organizations. The Welfare Institute is in front. Chapter 1108. So you're saying that it was a false alarm in the end? Luo Nan bent his fingers and elbows. His suspended body slowly sank down, but his tone was as calm as usual. Bamboo Pole's voice came through the Hexier. Weiwu is in the orphanage. He hasn't cut off contact with the camp. Dean 1 has a good reputation there. Of course, the protest team is restrained for now. Isn't that good? It's still troublesome for you. Bamboo Pole introduced the current situation. The protest team has already set up camp in the municipal plaza. The government is doing a bit better right now, but the citizens who are highly sensitive to the mutation infection are going crazy. Sporadic conflicts are occurring, and they will only get worse in the future. The central city is still over a dozen kilometers away from here. The problem is that the chaos caused by the mutation prevention and control policy can all be linked to you. That's right. You're just that shameless. And it happened in Xia City in your base camp. You'll be very passive in terms of public opinion and evaluation. Okay, that's right. The global census was an extremely sensitive operation. It was mixed with complicated interests, positions and practical contradictions. Many people were unwilling to accept Luo Nan's plan. They didn't oppose him face to face because they were afraid of Luo Nan's extraordinary strength. They didn't want to run head-on into him. But if there was a chance to delay and obstruct him, they wouldn't be lenient. Luo Nan had considered this problem long ago, but it wasn't something he could control. It wasn't something he should focus on with his limited energy. He just needed to understand it. In comparison, it was better to consider some more important fields that he was better at. Luo Nan returned from his one-finger handstand. He didn't even sweat a few drops. In fact, he wasn't training. He was just observing the state of his body. He only found out about this matter the next morning. It was because he was pondering over the interaction between his body and the magnetic photon mica. He was studying and familiarizing himself with the special perspective that exceeded human imagination. Bamboo Pole didn't say too much to Luo Nan now that he knew about Luo Nan's attitude. The newly formed team of the Foundation had already formed a consensus. Luo Nan was in charge of extraordinary work in this team. Everyone else only dealt with regular problems. It was enough to just give Luo Nan a reminder about the relevant matters. Bamboo Pole cut off the voice communication. Luo Nan scrubbed through the group chat records from last night as he scrubbed. He understood the details of the matter a step further. Bamboo Pole's introduction was very comprehensive. There wasn't much to say about the situation back then. Instead, it was the various social media channels that made things a bit more lively. Many people in the media, social activists, and public figures had already caught a glimpse of the opportunities within. They began to sing one after the other. Luo Nan hastily flipped through a few articles. He could see that Bamboo Pole, this crazy forwarding demon, had lost interest in similar information. From the wee hours of the morning until breakfast time, the mainstream of information had already changed to nutrition products. Luo Nan casually clicked open a dozen or so videos. Yes, they were indeed very pleasing to the eye. Let's just treat it as a massage for his brain that had been consuming a lot lately. Luo doing he needed. Luo. Luo he needed to. Luo needed. He needed. Luo. And as. Luo Nan as long as he said. He said, bamboo that the said. Luo Nan. Luo clan song. He said, he saying as the saying he as he sang. As he. This was the value of a data specialist. However, it was often at this time that Luo Nan couldn't help but criticize his own subtle attitude and actions. How depraved. Luo Nan, who was already seated at the dining table, let out a sigh. Breakfast isn't good? Madame Luo Shuqing, who had just urged the AI butler to complete the breakfast task, was at a sensitive moment. It's okay. Luo Nan said truthfully, the downloaded module is worth the money. Mo Peng immediately looked at him with admiration. This morning there were only 3 of them at the dining table. Professor Mo Hai Hang, who was usually in charge of the kitchen, had gone straight to work after yesterday's birthday party because he was working overtime. Emoya and Rue Wen kept their word and stayed in the recording studio for the whole night. With half of the people gone, the atmosphere around the table was indeed a little quieter, but that was as far as it went. Don't talk so much if you don't have anything to say. Take care of your voice. All right. Luo Nan subconsciously dug at the slightly protruding Adam's apple on his neck. Speaking of which, his voice had been growing hoarser and hoarser these past few days. He had clearly entered the stage of voice change. Luo Nan's uncle and aunt let out visible sighs of relief following this change. Though they didn't say anything in the past 2 years, they still cared a bit about Luo Nan's puberty, which was clearly lagging behind his peers. As a result, Luo Nan returned to his normal family life in late May. Small details like his voice change, his beard, and so on became increasingly clear. It might be related to his delayed puberty, though the reverse stimulation of the magneto-optical mica and even the grooming and adjustment of the perfect body might have played a larger role. Yep, it was puberty. His instincts. A bit of depravity was definitely due to the need to conform to the instincts of living beings that evolved over millions and millions of years. While Luo Nan's mind was spinning with all sorts of messy thoughts, his aunt picked up another call. It should be from Emoya. Luo Nan didn't mind. He just subconsciously opened the new link that Bamboo Pole sent. Only this time, it wasn't those snow-white colors and soft and smooth curves. Instead, it was replaced with a set of relatively abstract characters and symbols. It looked like it was a random drawing of the mood, equals or is not equal to. Is it really that hard to get the answer? The accompanying picture was that of a city plaza that was brilliantly lit. Luonan's mind spent approximately 3 seconds before he was able to switch channels. But he became confused because of the meaning behind this rather obscure description. The source of the message came from an extremely popular image-sharing social media. Luonan subconsciously looked towards the upper left corner of the image. It was a rather familiar avatar. It was so familiar that it made him even more confused. And at this time, Octopus popped up in the group chat. This is Shueyuan, right? The big sister captain of BHD? That's right, she's the captain. You can call her housekeeper. What the hell is big sister captain? Bamboo Pole, who forwarded the message, immediately retorted. It had to be said that Luonan was the only one who intersected with the BHD circle in Xia City. Cat eyes could be counted as well, but this sister was very clear about the distinction between the mortal world and the inner world. Luonan and Dal Bayu were closer in age within the BHD trio. Bayu was the one who got familiar with people. Everyone would occasionally chat online, so she was the closest of the three. Next was Clara. Luonan had encountered and solved 2 of her troubles in a row. It was hard not to have any impression of her. Comparatively speaking, Luonan and Shueyuan were the least familiar. However, last time at Aurora Cloud City, the BHD trio had performed at the New Year's Eve event. Bamboo Pole saw it. He liked Shueyuan the most, so he specifically followed her social media account. Shueyuan was a fitness expert. She often shared fitness photos and videos on her social media account. Therefore, every time Bamboo Pole forwarded a link to his friend circle, there would often be Shueyuan's work. It was quite pleasing to the eye. Luonan was certain. But this time it was clearly different. Is she alluding to the aberration infection? Qin Ikuin, who had intersected with the BHD trio in the past, came out of his lurking state. She should be talking about the missing migration. Octopus analyzed, the picture of the municipal plaza speaks volumes. Even if she wasn't, the public believed that she was at such a sensitive time. Sporadic curses could already be seen in the comments section. This was because Shueyuan herself was a little transparent among the artists. Even though the team had improved over the past half year, they had only risen from a group that could be cut off at any time to a marginalized group that needed to crazily rush shows in order to barely support their operating expenses. But no matter what was said, a public figure was a public figure. It didn't matter what standpoint one stood in the entertainment circle. Getting involved in this matter was truly a high risk. There was no need to do so. Luonan furrowed his brows. He saw that the discussion in the group was more or less the same as what he was thinking, so he didn't post any more opinions. The company that Moya worked at might have some idiots, but they still had basic qualities. Perhaps it wouldn't be long before the company deleted Shueyuan's post. Of course, it would be better if Luonan deleted it himself. As a friend, Luonan sent a message to Bayu, asking her to remind her captain. After sending the message, Bayu instantly replied with a dumbstruck emoji. Then she didn't say anything else. She probably went to remind Captain to deal with the matter over there. In the end, this was just a small matter. Luonan didn't pay too much attention to it. He continued to eat his meal in silence. At the same time, he split off a strand of his mind to continue to verify the various details of the external nutrients in his body's digestive and circulatory systems. He was searching for the basis for his detailed thesis. Luonan. Mrs. Luo Shuqing spoke once more from the seat of honor. Luonan immediately raised his head. Generally speaking, when his aunt called him by his full name, it meant that she was either in a bad mood or there really was something going on. His aunt had just received a round of phone calls. Her brows were still furrowed. You've been home these past few days. Won't you be delaying proper business? Mrs. Luo Shuqing's tone was quite calm. Proper business? The foundation you're talking about. I won't be delaying. Due to the recent rise in social authority of his entire family, the fact that Luonan was no longer a normal student, a normal person, could no longer be hidden from these close relatives of his small family. Luckily, Luonan's aunt's family had already passed the period of reaction to his current identity during these few days of seclusion. At least on the surface. Extraordinary ability user, gifted sensing master, specially hired expert of the Star Alliance Committee, member of the SEA's High Authority Group. These titles were all information that educated people of the present generation could understand. It was fine as long as they were equivalent to experts who enjoyed high-level allowances. As for the youngest extraordinary, the one-way tour guide who warped space and time, the card master who was a soul hunter, the human-shaped killing machine with global positioning, there was no need to waste time explaining these things that even the members of the inner world couldn't accept. At the same time, Luonan felt that it was very necessary to give his family some relatively normal information. The Luonan and his friends' foundation was among the normal ones. It was enough as long as his family had a bit of vigilance. They wouldn't be easily taken advantage of and bullied by the enemy. The true security system still needed the Xia City branch. Most importantly, Luonan himself had to seriously arrange it. As for the government's security measures of authority, it was nothing more than a formality. With these considerations in mind, Luonan was happy to use his duck-like voice to say a few more words. The foundation is still in the preparatory stage. We just held a thank you ceremony yesterday. The funds aren't a problem, but the personnel aren't in place yet. This was the speech Luonan had prepared for the outside world. It was just as effective when he used it on his family. It wasn't that he was intentionally hiding it. It was just that knowing this was enough for 99% of the people in this world. As expected, Mrs. Luo Shuqing didn't ask any further. She said, "Then are you still going to Gear's laboratory today?" "If there's nothing else, I'll still make a trip there. The facilities there are more complete." Although the most cutting-edge research that Luonan was currently undertaking couldn't be coordinated with and assisted by the facilities in Gear's underground laboratory on the North Bank, there were still some experiments that could be arranged there. And it was a bit more convenient than home. Having said this, Luonan cautiously asked, "Is there something you need?" Mrs. Luo Shuqing nodded. "Emoya just called. Their recording isn't going too smoothly. They might not be able to finish in the morning, so they need to ask Rui when for leave. I just gave the school a call." "Ha." Mo Peng, who was engrossed in eating his kanji, suddenly raised his head. "Ask for leave. You approve?" Mrs. Luo Shuqing raised her wrist to look at her watch. She said unhappily, "Eat your food. You're already up late. If you keep dawdling, you don't want to go to school, right?" Mo Peng had a face full of grief and indignation. He turned his head to look at Luonan, hoping to obtain a bit of sympathy. A bit of consolation would be fine, but Luonan acted as if he didn't see it. Luckily, as an elder, Luonan felt that the atmosphere was a bit delicate when these words were spoken. He swallowed his reprimand and was silent for 2 seconds before speaking. "Acumen College has been affected by the aberration infection. They're currently combing through their files. They're probably preparing for a rainy day." "They're doing research on the children of vagrant families and the like?" Luonan was startled. "Rui Wen isn't a vagrant." "I know. But the procedures for her show that she is. So she needs to go through a few additional procedures and do an additional registration? That's discrimination." Luonan hadn't done anything yet when Mo Peng slammed the table. But soon he buried his face into his rice bowl under his mother's stern gaze. Luonan also furrowed his brows. It appeared that this was another form of census. The household registration system was strict, and the thinking was relatively conservative in the region of Xia City. Doing these things conformed with the government's consistent logic. In fact, it was beneficial for the vast majority of people. But looking at it from another angle, there were many explanations. Whether it's discrimination or not, let's discuss the matter as it is before there are clear signs of it. Don't mess around. I looked at the registration form they sent over. The requirements for the procedures are quite strict, especially the procedures after returning to the city. They're quite strict. Mrs. Luo Shuqing sent Luonan a link to fill out the form. "I've handled all of Rui Wen's procedures, but now that I think about it, there are a lot of things that were done through your relationship. There are some twists and turns here that other people can't handle. Since you won't be going far away for a few days, you should take care of these things." Okay. Luonan's feelings were a bit subtle. He had never been a young master who didn't do any chores. But his aunt had never used this sort of tone to arrange a task for him before. She had never arranged a task of this nature. Plus, she didn't arrange complicated tasks and tests like she did in the past. She was worried that the child would run into a wall outside. She didn't take the trouble to teach him the details step by step. The current situation seemed to confirm that Luonan must, or at least must, possess the ability to handle this task. Yes, it was just like the legendary workplace, the arrangement a boss made for his employees. Luo Nan suddenly discovered that in Mrs. Luo Shuqing's heart, this nephew of hers clearly had a change in status in the family. Especially when compared to the person next to him. What are you dilly-dallying for? Do you want me to ask for a leave of absence for your teacher? Mo Peng stomped his feet and walked away. Luo Nan would normally just bury his head in eating at this time. This was basically the case in the past. But today his aunt still had a belly full of words to say, and it was still related to Ruiwen. This school year is about to end. You've already taken a leave of absence, so I won't say much. But I need to say a few words to Ruiwen. Luo Nan raised his head. What's up with Ruiwen? The final exams are only a few days away. I checked Ruiwen's class results. It's terrible. She practically scored full marks on the final exams, but she would be persuaded to repeat a year. Ha! On one hand, there's a problem with her studies. On the other hand, she's been skipping class far too often, especially in the past month or so. Luo Nan subconsciously avoided his aunt's gaze. Only he, her older brother, knew the best why Ruiwen was skipping class. The young girl spent the vast majority of her time wandering within the misty maze, searching for suitable planar processing materials for Luo Nan. Only Ruiwen's special ability allowed her to come and go freely within the boundless maze. In comparison, Luo Nan's detection activities in the tree-hole space could only be considered as statistics on a macroscopic level. If he wanted to do it in detail, on one hand he would consume too much computing power. On the other hand, he would be too close to the danger zone of the Sunwheel Extreme Prison. It would be very easy for him to create another incident like the Daydream Nightmare. It was impossible for him to explain such a thing to his aunt, so he could only pretend to be an ostrich. Fortunately, Madame Luo Shuqing was also mentally prepared for her nephew's half-hearted approach, so she did not probe further. She only said, I know that you have your own circle, and what you do are those so-called big things that are beyond common sense. I can't interfere in this aspect. No matter what, society is a big classroom. You'll more or less make some progress if you've been in it for a long time. You've made a lot of progress, I admit. The question is, where is Ruiwen? You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.